The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of destiny and power. For millennia, the Empire has conquered thousands of worlds, each one catalogued and subjugated under the iron fist of Emperor Palpatine. But what happens when that vast military machine stumbles upon a world that has never known the Force, never seen a lightsaber, and believes itself alone in the universe? The astronomers at the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico were the first to see it. Dr. Maria Vasquez had been tracking what she thought was an unusual asteroid cluster when the readings went catastrophic. Objects the size of aircraft carriers were decelerating from impossible speeds, their energy signatures unlike anything in the known laws of physics. Within minutes, every space agency on Earth confirmed what seemed like mass delusion. 7 massive vessels had emerged from empty space, now holding position in high orbit above the planet. The ships were triangular, their hulls a stark gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each one measured over a mile in length, bristling with structures that could only be weapons emplacements. The largest vessel hung like a dagger, pointed at Earth's heart, its bridge tower rising from the hull like the head of some ancient predator. No radio contact, no response to hailing frequencies. Just silence from the void, and the unmistakable reality that humanity was no longer alone. Aboard the Imperial Star Destroyer Inexorable, Captain Thrask stood on the command bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the blue-green world rotating beneath them. 23 years of service to the Empire, and he had never encountered a planet quite like this one. The atmospheric composition was perfect for human life. The continents showed clear signs of industrial civilization, yet there was no hyperspace beacon, no orbital defense platforms, no response to standard Imperial frequencies. "Sir, preliminary scans complete," his sensor officer reported, hunched over a console that glowed with streams of data. The planet shows extensive electromagnetic activity, thousands of satellites in low orbit, though their technology is primitive. Nuclear fission signatures across multiple continents. They've achieved atomic power, but haven't developed repulsor lift technology or even basic deflector shields. Thrask's jaw tightened. A pre-hyperspace civilization. He had encountered perhaps 3 such worlds in his career, each one catalogued and quarantined per Imperial protocol. But those had been backwater planets in explored space. This world had appeared on no charts, existed in no Imperial database. The hyperspace anomaly that had pulled his task force off course had deposited them in what appeared to be an entirely separate galaxy. Or at minimum, the unexplored void beyond the Outer Rim's furthest reaches. "Population estimate?" Thrask asked. "Over 7 billion sentient beings, sir. Primarily human or near human. Multiple nation-states rather than a unified government. We're detecting active military installations on every continent. Multiple nuclear arsenals." The officer paused, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Sir, they're primitive, but they're not defenseless. And there are a lot of them." The captain considered this. Standard Imperial doctrine was clear. Overwhelming force followed by political annexation. The Emperor demanded order, and order came through strength. But 7 billion beings on a planet that had never heard of the Empire, never experienced the power of the dark side. The logistics alone would be staggering. "Establish a planetary blockade," Thrask ordered. "Deploy TIE fighter patrols at 12-hour intervals. I want constant scanning of their military capabilities and communications networks. And send for Admiral Corlen. This discovery requires command-level decisions. On the planet's surface, pandemonium had erupted across every time zone. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session while military commanders from every major nation scrambled encrypted communications. News networks broadcast continuous coverage of the objects in orbit. Their cameras zoomed to maximum as they captured grainy images of the triangular warships. Social media exploded with theories ranging from alien invasion to elaborate hoax, though the worldwide telescope confirmations quickly silenced the skeptics. In the White House Situation Room, President Catherine Morrison stared at the tactical display showing the disposition of the unknown vessels. Her military advisors surrounded the table, their faces grim as they processed intelligence reports from NORAD, the Pentagon, and NASA. "What are we dealing with?" Morrison asked, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. General Marcus Webb, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, pulled up enhanced satellite imagery. "Madam President, these vessels are using propulsion systems we can't identify. They're maintaining perfect orbital position without any visible thrust. Our best aerospace engineers say that's impossible with any known technology. Each ship masses somewhere between 50 and 100,000 tons, and they're covered in what appear to be weapons batteries. Have they made any hostile moves?" "Negative, ma'am. They're just watching. But we've detected smaller craft launching from the main vessels, reconnaissance drones, we think. They're scanning the planet, taking readings. Whatever they are, they're gathering intelligence." Director Sarah Chen of the CIA leaned forward, tablet in hand. "We've established communication with our counterparts in Russia, China, the EU, and every other major power. Everyone's seeing the same thing, and everyone's equally terrified. The UN Secretary General is proposing a unified response team. But there's already disagreement about whether we should attempt communication or prepare for the worst." Morrison felt the weight of the moment crushing down on her shoulders. Humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, and it came in the form of a heavily armed fleet appearing without warning. Every science fiction scenario she'd ever read suddenly felt naively optimistic. "Get me every linguist, physicist, and xenobiologist we have," she ordered. "And put our military on DEFCON 2. We hope for peace, but we prepare for war. If they wanted to talk, they would have said something by now." High above, in the Inexorable's war room, Admiral Jael Corlin studied the holographic projection of Earth with the calculating gaze of a veteran who had pacified 14 systems. A tall woman with iron-gray hair and a scar tracing her left cheek. She had earned her command through ruthless efficiency and unwavering loyalty to the Empire. A planet of billions with no knowledge of the Empire, no connection to the Galactic Republic's records, and presumably no Force sensitives, she mused. "Captain Thrask, this could be the most significant discovery since the Clone Wars. Or it could be an insignificant footnote. The question is, what does the Emperor want us to do with it?" Thrask knew that question had only one answer. The Emperor wanted control. The Emperor always wanted control. "Standard subjugation protocol, Admiral?" Corlin's smile was cold, modified. "We're too far from Imperial space for reinforcements, and this population is too large for our current force to occupy effectively. We'll offer them a choice: willing integration into the Empire with minimal bloodshed, or we demonstrate why resistance is futile." She gestured to the communications officer. "Prepare a message. Broadcast it on every frequency they use. Let's see if these humans understand reason." Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, aboard Air Force One, President Morrison received the alert simultaneously with every other world leader. The message was coming through. Every television, every radio, every device capable of receiving a signal was being overridden by a transmission from the ships above. The face that appeared on screens worldwide was human, or close enough that the differences were imperceptible. Admiral Corlen's image was crystal clear, rendered with technology that made Earth's best broadcasts look like amateur footage. "People of Earth," she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am Admiral Jael Corlin of the Galactic Empire. You have lived your entire existence believing yourselves alone in the universe. That belief ends today. Your world has been discovered, and with that discovery comes a choice. The Galactic Empire spans millions of systems and has brought order to countless civilizations. We offer you the same opportunity. Join the Empire willingly, accept our governance, and your world will be protected, your people given purpose within the greater galactic community." She paused, letting the words sink in across 7 billion minds. Or refuse, and learn why the Empire's authority is absolute. You have 72 hours to respond. Choose wisely. The transmission ended, leaving behind a silence that stretched across continents. Humanity had been given an ultimatum by an empire they hadn't known existed an hour ago. The clock was now ticking toward either submission or the first interstellar war Earth had ever known. In government bunkers, military command centers, and living rooms around the world, the same question echoed. What do we do? If you want to see more scenarios where massive empires face unexpected challenges, hit that subscribe button and drop your ideas for galactic invasions or first contact scenarios in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The 72-hour clock Admiral Corlen had set became a countdown that dominated every news cycle, every government deliberation, every conversation in every language across the globe. Humanity had never moved with such unified urgency. Yet that unity was fracturing even as it formed. The question wasn't just whether to resist or submit. It was who had the authority to answer for the entire species. The emergency session of the United Nations General Assembly descended into chaos within the first hour. The Secretary General's proposal for a unified planetary response crumbled as national interests collided with species-level survival instincts. China's representative argued for immediate negotiation, citing the catastrophic cost of resistance against clearly superior technology. The Russian delegate countered that submission would mean the end of sovereignty for every nation. The European Union called for scientific inquiry and diplomatic channels. Smaller nations demanded equal voice in decisions that would affect them all. President Morrison watched the UN proceedings via secure video feed, her frustration mounting with each passing minute. The same arguments were cycling through her own cabinet. Secretary of Defense James Harlow advocated for immediate military readiness. If they were going to fight, they needed every advantage time could provide. Secretary of State Patricia Vance argued for attempting communication, understanding the Empire's terms before making irreversible decisions. The intelligence community was split between those analyzing the transmission for clues about Imperial intentions and those wargaming invasion scenarios. "We're running out of time arguing about who gets to make the decision," Morrison said, cutting through the debate in the Situation Room. "General Webb, what's our actual military assessment? Can we fight these ships?" Webb pulled up tactical projections on the main display. "Honestly, Madam President, we don't know. Our best estimate is that each of those vessels carries firepower equivalent to a naval battle group. But that's speculation based on visible weapons emplacements. We've never seen their shields or armor in action. We've never seen their fighters in combat. Hell, we don't even know if they have ground forces or if they plan to glass the planet from orbit." "Nuclear capability?" Morrison asked the question everyone was thinking, but few wanted to voice. "Theoretically, yes. We could launch ICBMs at the vessels." but we'd be firing blind. No idea if nuclear warheads would even penetrate their defenses. And if we try and fail, we've just shown them our best hand while proving we're hostile. Webb's expression was grim. There's also the retaliation factor. If they can cross interstellar space, what kind of weapons do they have? We could be inviting planetary annihilation. Director Chen from the CIA interjected, sliding a tablet across the table. We've been analyzing the Admiral's transmission frame by frame. The technology visible in the background of that broadcast is centuries beyond ours, maybe more. But here's what's interesting. She's human, or human enough that we can't tell the difference. That suggests either parallel evolution, common ancestry, or they've encountered humans before. Does that help us? Morrison asked. Maybe. It means we might be able to understand their psychology, their motivations. They think like us, potentially. But it also means they know how to conquer species exactly like us. They've done this before. While Earth's governments argued, the Empire was conducting its own assessment. Captain Thrask stood before a holographic display in the Inexorable's Intelligence Center, reviewing reports from probe droids that had penetrated Earth's atmosphere under cover of night. The data was both fascinating and troubling. They have nuclear weapons, Lieutenant Vex reported, highlighting clusters of red indicators across the holographic globe. Thousands of them, fission and fusion warheads mounted on ballistic missiles, strategic bombers, and submarine platforms. Their delivery systems are crude but functional. Thrask studied the distribution. Enough to threaten our ships? Unknown, sir. Our shields should hold against primitive nuclear devices. But we've never tested Imperial technology against this exact threat profile. These weapons are more powerful than expected for their development level. They've clearly prioritized destructive capacity over exploration. Vex zoomed in on various military installations. They also have sophisticated conventional forces. Millions of trained soldiers, thousands of armored vehicles and aircraft. Individually, no match for our stormtroopers or AT-ATs. But the sheer numbers are concerning. Admiral Corlin entered the Intelligence Center, her command presence silencing the low murmur of technicians. Assessment, Captain. The planet is more militarized than initial scans suggested, Admiral. Multiple nation-states maintain standing armies and nuclear arsenals. They're primitive, but not defenseless. A ground occupation would require significant resources. Then we don't occupy, Corlin said flatly. We demonstrate, we dominate, and we install compliant local governance. Standard Imperial doctrine for pre-hyperspace worlds. She pulled up population density maps. Target their largest population centers. Not for destruction, for leverage. We occupy their capitals, their economic centers. We show them resistance is futile without wasting resources on total conquest. Thrask felt a familiar discomfort he'd learned to suppress over his years of service. He'd seen this strategy before on Ryloth, on Lothal, on a dozen worlds that had resisted Imperial authority. It was effective, it was brutal, and it always left scars that lasted generations. Admiral, there's another consideration, he ventured carefully. We're beyond Imperial space, possibly beyond contact with the core worlds. Our task force is alone out here. If this population proves more difficult than anticipated, we have no reinforcements available. Corlin's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting we should fear these primitives, Captain? I'm suggesting we should respect their numbers and their nuclear capacity. 7 billion is a significant population even with technological disparity, which is precisely why we must establish dominance immediately. Fear is more efficient than force, Captain. They'll learn that soon enough. She turned to the communications officer. Prepare a second transmission and ready a demonstration, something that will clarify the stakes. On Earth, the 72 hours had compressed to 48. The arguments continued, but patterns were emerging. Most democratic nations leaned toward some form of negotiated submission, buying time, preserving lives, hoping for eventual independence. Authoritarian regimes split between those seeking favorable terms with the Empire and those preparing for defiant resistance. Smaller nations looked to larger powers for protection that no one could guarantee. President Morrison had made her decision, though it would satisfy no one. The United States would not submit to foreign rule, terrestrial or otherwise. But neither would they fire the first shot that might doom billions. They would prepare for war while attempting to establish communication, walking a razor's edge between capitulation and catastrophe. That decision became irrelevant when the second transmission arrived. Admiral Corlin's face reappeared on every screen, but this time without preamble or diplomacy. Your 72 hours are half expired, and we have detected no unified response. This suggests either indecision or defiance. The Galactic Empire does not tolerate either. You will now witness what resistance costs. The transmission switched to an external view from one of the Star Destroyers. Earth rotated beneath, beautiful and fragile in the darkness of space. Then the flagship's forward turbo-laser batteries powered up, visible as glowing green emplacements along the ship's hull. In the Atlantic Ocean, 600 miles east of the Azores, the water began to glow. Satellites tracking the Star Destroyers captured the moment the turbo-laser beams lanced down from orbit, each one carrying more concentrated energy than any weapon Earth had ever developed. The ocean exploded into superheated steam, the beams penetrating 500 feet before dissipating their energy. For 10 seconds, the bombardment continued, visible from 3 continents as a green pillar of light connecting space to sea. When it stopped, the ocean boiled where the beams had struck. A thermal bloom spread for miles in every direction. Marine life for 20 miles in every direction died instantly. The shockwave generated a tsunami that would reach the Azores in 3 hours, though it would diminish to manageable levels by then. The message was clear. This had been restraint. This had been a demonstration in an empty ocean. Next time could be New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, or any of the thousands of cities where humanity congregated in vulnerable masses. Corlin's face returned to the screens. You have 36 hours remaining. The Empire's patience is not infinite. Choose submission, or we will choose your major population centers for further demonstrations. The next one will not strike empty ocean. The transmission ended, leaving behind a planet united at last, united in terror. In Washington, Morrison stared at satellite imagery of the still glowing Atlantic waters. The energy readings from that bombardment exceeded anything in America's arsenal. One ship had done that. They had 7, and who knew what other weapons remained hidden? Get me the Russian president, the Chinese premier, and every other nuclear power on a secure line, she ordered, her voice hollow. We need a unified military response plan, and we need it in the next 12 hours. Because if we're going to fight these bastards, we have one chance to hit them with everything we have before they decide to stop demonstrating and start exterminating. General Webb was already coordinating with NORAD, STRATCOM, and allied military commands worldwide. Plans that had been theoretical exercises hours ago were now operational necessities. Every submarine capable of launching ICBMs was moving to firing positions, Every strategic bomber was being armed. Every satellite tracking station was locking onto the Imperial vessels with targeting solutions that might be humanity's only hope. Earth was going to war with an empire from beyond the stars. And somewhere in the back of every military planner's mind was the terrible certainty that this war might be over before it truly began. The countdown continued. 36 hours to submission or annihilation. The next 12 hours transformed Earth from a fractured collection of competing nations into something it had never been. A unified war machine with a single enemy. The irony wasn't lost on the strategists coordinating the response. Humanity had finally achieved global cooperation, and it had taken the threat of extinction to accomplish it. In a bunker beneath the Ural Mountains, representatives from the United States, Russia, China, the European Union, India, Pakistan, Israel, and every other nuclear-capable nation sat around a table that had been designed for a very different kind of apocalypse. The Cold War's doomsday protocols were being repurposed for an enemy no one had imagined when those bunkers were built. "We have one advantage," General Webb stated, his voice transmitted simultaneously to command centers across the globe. "Surprise. They think we're primitives who'll either submit or scatter. They don't expect coordinated resistance, and they certainly don't expect us to strike first." Russian General Dmitry Volkov leaned forward, his weathered face grim on the video display. "You propose we launch nuclear weapons at vessels in orbit over our own planet? The electromagnetic pulse alone could cripple our infrastructure. The fallout from their wreckage will be preferable to subjugation," Webb interrupted. "We've run the models. If we concentrate fire on the largest vessel, their flagship, and achieve a kill, the others might retreat. At minimum, we demonstrate we're not helpless prey." Chinese Admiral Chen Wu shook her head. "And if their shields hold? If our best weapons do nothing? Then we've revealed our capability and invited retaliation against defenseless cities." President Morrison's voice cut through the debate. She'd been listening from the White House, but now she unmuted her feed. "We don't have the luxury of perfect options. In 36 hours, they start targeting population centers unless we surrender. I won't condemn billions to slavery without a fight. But I also won't launch blind. We need intelligence. We need to know if our weapons can hurt them." Director Chen from the CIA spoke up from her position at NSA headquarters. "We might have an option. One of their smaller craft, the reconnaissance drones, crashed 2 hours ago in the Amazon rainforest. Brazilian military has secured the site. If we can analyze their technology, their materials, we might get some idea of their defensive capabilities." 2 hours? Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Why am I just hearing about this?" "Because it took that long to confirm it wasn't a hoax, Madam President. We have teams en route now. But here's the interesting part. Initial reports suggest the drone was shot down." Silence fell across the multinational command conference. "Shot down by what?" General Webb demanded. "Small arms fire, possibly. The drone was flying low, scanning agricultural regions. It encountered a group of locals who apparently decided to shoot at it with hunting rifles. Most rounds bounced off, but it seems they hit something critical. The drone crashed and burned." A ripple of dark laughter went through the assembled commanders. Somewhere in the Amazon, subsistence farmers had accomplished what the world's militaries were still debating. They'd proven the Empire's technology could be damaged. Aboard the Inexorable, Captain Thrask received the report of the lost probe with growing unease. The drone had been destroyed by kinetic projectiles, bullets in the local terminology. Primitive chemical-propelled slugs had penetrated the probe's light shielding and severed power conduits. It was a minor loss, but it revealed a vulnerability he hadn't considered. The Empire's technology was optimized for fighting other advanced civilizations with energy weapons. These humans still used physical projectiles, and the Empire's standard defensive systems weren't calibrated for that threat profile. "Sir, the natives who destroyed the probe have scattered," Lieutenant Vex reported. "We tracked them briefly, but they disappeared into dense jungle terrain. Should we deploy stormtroopers to recover them?" Thrask considered it. A ground deployment this early would reveal Imperial capabilities while demonstrating that even their surveillance could be challenged. "Negative. Mark the area for future pacification. Our priority is the planetary response to the Admiral's deadline." "Speaking of which, sir, we're detecting unusual activity across the planet. Increased electromagnetic emissions, military movements, encrypted communications traffic has tripled. They're coordinating something." "Expected. They're either preparing to surrender or preparing to resist." Thrask studied the tactical display, showing Earth's military dispositions. "What concerns me is the weapons systems they're moving into position. Those submarines surfacing and submerging in attack patterns, the aircraft taking up high-altitude orbits, the installations powering up across multiple continents. If they have ballistic nuclear weapons, our shields can withstand nuclear detonations, sir. Imperial specifications are clear." Imperial specifications were written for known threat parameters. These people developed fusion weapons before repulsor lift technology. Their destructive capacity outpaced their defensive evolution. That makes them unpredictable. Thrask pulled up casualty estimates for various engagement scenarios. All of them showed acceptable Imperial losses and catastrophic native casualties. "Alert the fleet to heightened readiness. If they attack, we respond with overwhelming force. The Admiral wants dominance. We'll give her annihilation if necessary." In the Amazon, a joint task force of Brazilian Special Forces, American Navy SEALs, and scientific personnel from a dozen nations converged on the crash site. The probe was still smoking, its hull cracked open like an egg to reveal crystalline circuitry and power systems that seemed to operate on principles Earth's physicists couldn't immediately identify. Dr. Rachel Kim, MIT's leading expert in materials science, ran her gloved hands over a fragment of the hull plating. "This alloy shouldn't exist. The molecular structure is too perfect, too uniform. It's like it was grown rather than forged." She pulled out a portable spectrometer. "And the density is wrong. This should weigh 3 times what it does." Her colleague, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, from Tokyo University, was examining the power core, or what remained of it. "Fusion generator, definitely. But the containment system is nothing like our tokamak designs. It's compact, efficient, and apparently vulnerable to physical trauma." He pointed to where a bullet had punched through the casing. Regular copper-jacketed ammunition penetrated this. Their shielding couldn't stop it. Commander Sarah Ortiz of DevGru, SEAL Team 6, crouched beside them, her tactical mind already processing the implications. "So we can hurt them with conventional weapons. That's something." "It's not much," Dr. Kim cautioned. "This is a reconnaissance drone, not a warship. Their military vessels could have entirely different defensive systems. We're extrapolating from a scout probe what might work against a Star Destroyer." "It's more than we had an hour ago," Ortiz countered. She activated her secure comm. "JSOC, this is Ground Team Alpha. The package's confirmed alien tech and conventional kinetics achieved penetration. Recommend continued analysis, but preliminary assessment is our weapons aren't useless. We can hurt them if we get close enough." The response came from General Webb himself. "Acknowledged, Alpha. But close enough is the problem. Those ships are in high orbit. We need them lower, or we need weapons that can reach them with enough force to matter. Ortiz looked up at the sky, where somewhere beyond the clouds and atmosphere, 7 warships held humanity's fate in balance. Then, we need to make them come down, or we need to go up. 24 hours remained on the Imperial deadline. In those hours, humanity accomplished what should have taken months. Every space-capable nation contributed to a desperate plan. The International Space Station, previously a symbol of peaceful cooperation, was hastily evacuated and retrofitted with every weapon system that could be adapted to zero-gravity combat. Russian Progress supply vessels were loaded with high-explosive charges instead of supplies. China's secretive space plane was armed with experimental kinetic weapons. Even private space companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin volunteered their assets for a coordinated strike. It wouldn't be enough to win, but it might be enough to prove humanity wouldn't go quietly into subjugation. President Morrison addressed the nation, and through simultaneous translation, the world, in a broadcast that would be remembered for generations. She stood in the Oval Office, looking directly into the camera with the weight of her office and her species on her shoulders. 36 hours ago, we learned we are not alone in the universe. We learned that an empire spanning countless worlds has found Earth and demanded our submission. They have given us a deadline. They have demonstrated their power. They believe we will kneel or be destroyed. She paused, letting the words settle. They don't know humanity very well. Make no mistake, the weapons they possess terrify me. The casualties we may suffer horrify me. But I will not be the president who surrendered the freedom of every human being without a fight. I will not tell your children and grandchildren that when we faced the choice between liberty and survival, we chose to survive as slaves. In the next 12 hours, we will respond to the Empire's ultimatum. We will do so not with words, but with action. Every nation, every military, every person who believes freedom is worth defending, we stand together. If we fall as one species fighting for our home. And if we somehow prevail, we will have proven that Earth's children do not bow to tyrants, no matter how far they've traveled or how powerful they appear. To the Empire watching us from orbit, you misjudged us. You thought we were primitives. You're about to learn we're something far more dangerous. We're humans protecting our home. And we don't need hyperdrives or laser swords to fight for what's ours. The broadcast ended. The countdown continued. And across Earth, millions of men and women in uniform prepared to fire the first shots in a war for the survival of their species. Admiral Corlin watched the transmission with something approaching admiration. The woman was brave, if foolish. They always were, these planetary leaders who chose defiance over pragmatism. She'd seen it dozens of times, and it always ended the same way. With broken cities and broken people learning too late that courage without power was just another word for suicide. They're going to attack, she said to Captain Thrask. So it appears, Admiral. Should we strike first? Corlin considered it. The humane answer was yes. Hit their military installations before they could launch, minimize casualties on both sides. But mercy required strength, demonstrated, not just threatened. These humans needed to learn the futility of resistance through their own failed assault. They needed to throw everything they had at the Empire and watch it shatter against Imperial might. Only then would they truly understand what they faced. Let them fire first, Corlin ordered. Let them see their best weapons fail. Then we remind them why the Emperor's rule is inevitable. 12 hours until the deadline. Across Earth, firing solutions locked into place. Submarines opened missile tubes. Bombers reached altitude. Ground-based cannons that could reach near-orbital ranges prepared to fire. Humanity held its collective breath. And in orbit, the Galactic Empire waited to teach another primitive world the oldest lesson in the galaxy. Resistance is futile when your enemy commands the high ground and the firepower to scour life from your world. The war was about to begin. The question was whether Earth would survive long enough to learn how to fight it. The attack began at 400 hours Greenwich Mean Time. Launched from positions scattered across the globe with a coordinated precision that only existential terror could inspire. It started in silence. Nuclear-armed submarines releasing their payloads from beneath Arctic ice and Pacific depths, their missiles breaking the surface in columns of fire and steam. Within 90 seconds, 47 intercontinental ballistic missiles were arcing upward through the atmosphere, their trajectories calculated to converge on the Imperial flagship. From Vandenberg Space Force Base, Minuteman III missiles roared from their silos. Russian RS-28 Sarmats lifted off from positions across Siberia. China's DF-41 missiles climbed from mobile launchers hidden in mountain ranges. France contributed its submarine-launched M51 missiles. Britain, India, Pakistan, Israel, every nation with nuclear capability threw everything into the coordinated strike. It was overkill by Cold War standards, more than enough firepower to crack continents and poison atmospheres for generations. It would have to be enough. Captain Thrask watched the launches from his position on the Inexorable's bridge, his expression carefully neutral even as his gut twisted with the familiar pre-combat tension. Across the bridge, crew members responded with trained efficiency, but he could see the underlying nervousness. They'd fought rebels and pirates, insurgents and criminal cartels. But this was different. This was an entire planet's population throwing its deadliest weapons at them in one desperate gambit. Multiple ballistic launches detected across the planetary surface, the sensor officer reported, his voice professionally calm. Tracking 47, 52, 63 inbound projectiles, all trajectories converging on our position. Impact in 6 minutes. Admiral Corlin stood at the viewport, watching the rising contrails with the detached interest of someone studying an interesting academic exercise. Nuclear warheads? Confirmed, Admiral. Fission and fusion weapons ranging from 500 kilotons to 50 megatons yield. If even half reach us, the combined detonation will exceed 2,000 megatons. How quaint. They're trying to vaporize us. Corlin turned to Thrask. Shields? Deflector shields operating at optimal capacity, Admiral. We've never tested them against this exact threat profile. But Imperial specifications rate our shields for sustained capital ship turbo-laser bombardment. These nuclear devices, while powerful by their standards, shouldn't penetrate. Shouldn't, Corlin repeated, tasting the uncertainty. How confident are you, Captain? Thrask met her gaze. 80%, Admiral. But that remaining 20% acknowledges these weapons represent an evolutionary path we haven't encountered. They've weaponized stellar fusion reactions without first developing defensive countermeasures. It's possible. Unlikely. But possible. Their crude approach contains variables our shields weren't designed to handle. Then I suppose we're about to find out. Corlin clasped her hands behind her back. Maintain position. No evasive maneuvers. I want them to see their best weapons strike our shields and fail. Fear must be total, Captain. Doubt must be eliminated. They need to understand that their defiance is meaningless. In the White House Situation Room, President Morrison watched the live feed from multiple satellites as 63 missiles climbed toward their target. Every nuclear power on Earth had agreed to this moment. a single coordinated strike before the Empire could respond to individual attacks. One shot, one chance to prove they could hurt the invaders. Impact in 3 minutes, General Webb reported, his eyes locked on the tactical display. All birds are running clean. No interception attempts from the Imperial fleet. Either they're confident in their defenses or they don't recognize the threat. Or they want us to see this fail, Director Chen said quietly. Maximum psychological impact. Morrison didn't respond. She was thinking about the billions of people watching this unfold across every media platform on Earth, thinking about what would happen if this failed. The Empire had promised to target population centers: New York, Moscow, Beijing, Tokyo, London, Paris. Pick any major city and imagine it experiencing what that Atlantic Ocean demonstration had shown. Billions of lives hung on whether nuclear weapons designed to destroy other humans could damage vessels designed to conquer entire planets. The missiles reached the apex of their trajectories and began their terminal descent toward the inexorable. On dozens of vessels in the Imperial Task Force, TIE fighter pilots received scrambled launch orders. But Admiral Corlin countermanded them. No interception, no defensive fire. Let the primitives see their best effort break against Imperial superiority. Shields at maximum, Thrask ordered across the ship-wide comm. All personnel brace for impact. This will be interesting. The first warhead detonated 300 meters from the Inexorable's hull. A 50-megaton fusion device that released more energy in a microsecond than all of humanity's conventional weapons had released in its entire history of warfare. The fireball expanded in the vacuum of space, a miniature sun blooming against the darkness. Then the second missile hit, and the third. And in a cascading sequence timed to overwhelm any defense, 63 nuclear warheads detonated in a sphere of overlapping destruction that bathed the Imperial flagship in radiation, heat, and electromagnetic chaos. For 15 seconds, the Inexorable disappeared inside a maelstrom of nuclear fire. Satellites watching the engagement went blind from the electromagnetic pulse. On Earth, every radio frequency went static. The upper atmosphere ionized from the radiation bloom, creating an aurora visible from pole to pole even in daylight. Then the light faded, and the Inexorable emerged, shields flickering with chromatic distortions, but fundamentally intact. Not a single breach, not a single casualty. The Star Destroyer hung in space exactly where it had been, utterly unmoved by humanity's most powerful weapons. In the Situation Room, silence fell like a hammer. Morrison felt her heart sink as the sensor data confirmed what her eyes were seeing. The shields had held. Every nuclear weapon Earth could throw in a coordinated strike had accomplished nothing more than a light show. God help us, someone whispered. Aboard the Inexorable, Thrask allowed himself a breath of relief even as he studied the shield status displays. They'd held, but barely. The shields had dropped to 47% capacity during the bombardment, and 2 forward generators had burned out from the sustained energy load. If Earth had managed to launch another salvo in the next 60 seconds, they might have penetrated. But the primitives didn't know that. All they saw was their best weapons failing. Damage report, he ordered. Shields recovering to 70% and climbing. 2 forward generators offline, but backups compensating. No hull breaches, no casualties. Some minor system overloads in forward sections from the electromagnetic pulse, but nothing critical. Lieutenant Vex looked up from his console, eyes wide. Sir, those weapons were more powerful than anticipated. If they'd coordinated their detonations to concentrate on a single shield facing instead of distributing around our hull, They didn't know to do that, Lieutenant. They attacked like primitives, with overwhelming force distributed evenly. They don't understand shield mechanics or tactical concentration of fire. Thrask turned to Admiral Corlin. "Your orders, Admiral?" Corlin's smile was cold satisfaction. "Now we teach them the cost of defiance. Target their launch sites. Every missile installation we detected, every submarine that fired, every military base that participated in this attack. Precision turbo laser strikes. I want their military infrastructure crippled within the hour. And then," she pulled up a holographic display of Earth's major cities. "Then we demonstrate on a population center. Something significant, but not catastrophic. 10 million casualties. That should clarify the stakes." Thrask felt the familiar weight of Imperial duty pressing down on him. He'd followed similar orders a dozen times, watching cities burn from orbit because their governments chose defiance over submission. It never got easier. It never felt clean. But it was the job, and he'd chosen it. "Target package designated," he said, his voice hollow. "Awaiting your command to fire." On Earth, panic was spreading faster than government communications could contain it. The nuclear attack had failed. Everyone had seen it. The missiles that were supposed to be humanity's ultimate deterrent, weapons that had kept rival nations at bay for 70 years, had done nothing. And now the Imperial ships were moving, their weapon systems powering up with a green glow visible even from the ground. President Morrison made a decision that would haunt her for whatever remained of her life. "General Webb, activate emergency broadcast protocol. Every person on Earth needs to get to shelter in the next 10 minutes. Subways, basements, reinforced structures, anywhere with overhead protection. They're going to retaliate, and we can't stop it." "Madam President, if we're evacuating, we're admitting defeat. The world will see the truth, General. We took our best shot, and it bounced off their shields. Now they're going to show us what real firepower looks like. And I won't have people die because we were too proud to tell them to take cover." She turned to the camera operator in the corner of the Situation Room. "Get me a live broadcast, now." 60 seconds later, her face appeared on every screen that still had power. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the terror she was fighting to control. "This is President Morrison. I am ordering an immediate emergency shelter protocol for all citizens. The attack failed. I repeat, the attack failed. The Imperial vessels are preparing to retaliate. You have approximately 10 minutes to reach the nearest shelter. This is not a drill. This is not a hoax. Seek shelter immediately and await further instructions. May God protect us all." The broadcast cut out as the first turbo laser strikes lanced down from orbit. Vandenberg Space Force Base in California was the first to die. The turbo laser beam punched through the atmosphere in a column of superheated plasma, striking the installation with pinpoint precision. Missile silos that had launched the ICBMs 40 minutes earlier exploded as the beam ignited their remaining fuel and warheads. Secondary explosions rippled across the base for 30 seconds, and when the beam cut off, nothing remained but a crater, glowing with residual heat. The pattern repeated across the globe. Russian missile installations in Siberia, Chinese launch sites in mountain ranges, submarine pens in Scotland, France, and Washington State, French launch facilities, Pakistani military bases. Every nation that had contributed to the nuclear strike watched their military infrastructure systematically destroyed from orbit, with weapons that made nuclear devices look primitive by comparison. The bombardment lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, Earth's offensive nuclear capability had been reduced by 70%. The submarines at sea were still intact. Mobile launchers that had survived could potentially fire again. But the bulk of humanity's strategic deterrent was burning wreckage. And then Admiral Corlin selected her demonstration target, Jakarta, Indonesia. 29 million people in the metropolitan area. A major city, but not a primary power capital. Significant enough to prove the Empire's reach. Not so critical that it would decapitate global leadership. A calculated act of terror designed to break resistance. The Inexorable's main forward turbolaser batteries trained on the coordinates. Captain Thrask entered the firing authorization, his hands steady through years of practice, even as his conscience screamed. This was murder on a scale that dwarfed any atrocity in human history. This was genocide as tactical demonstration. Forward batteries charged and locked, he reported. Target acquired. Corlin nodded. Fire. In Jakarta, emergency sirens had been wailing for 30 minutes. People fled toward whatever shelter they could find: subway tunnels, reinforced buildings, underground parking structures. But 30 minutes wasn't enough time to evacuate 29 million people from a sprawling metropolitan region. Most were still above ground, still vulnerable when the sky turned green. The turbo laser beam struck the city center with the force of 100 nuclear weapons concentrated into a single point. The presidential palace, the national monument, the entire government district, everything within a kilometer of the impact point vaporized instantly. The shockwave propagated outward at supersonic speed, collapsing buildings for 15 kilometers in every direction. The heat ignited fires that merged into a firestorm visible from space. The bombardment lasted 10 seconds. When it ended, the city center was a crater of molten rock and twisted metal. The casualty count would take days to calculate, but preliminary estimates put it at 4 million dead, with millions more injured or displaced. One city, 10 seconds, 4 million lives. The broadcast from Admiral Corlin came moments later, transmitted across every surviving communications network on Earth. Her face was impassive, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. This is the consequence of defiance. Jakarta's fate was your choice, not ours. Every life lost today is blood on the hands of your leaders, who chose resistance over reason. You have 12 hours to reconsider. Surrender unconditionally, or we select another city, and another, and another. Until you understand that the Galactic Empire's authority is not a negotiation. It is an inevitability. Choose wisely, or we will choose for you. The transmission ended, leaving behind a planet in shock. Humanity's best weapons had failed. The Empire's retaliation had been surgical and devastating. And now the choice was starker than ever. Submit to avoid further slaughter, or continue fighting a war that looked increasingly unwinnable. In the ruins of Jakarta, the fires burned on. And across Earth, billions of people asked themselves the same terrible question. Is freedom worth this price? The 12 hours following Jakarta's destruction became known as the Long Night, though it encompassed day and night across every time zone. It was a period where humanity collectively held its breath, paralyzed between the instinct to survive and the refusal to surrender. Governments that had stood unified during the nuclear strike now fractured along fault lines of philosophy, fear, and calculation. In Beijing, the Standing Committee of the Communist Party convened an emergency session. Premier Li Qiang faced his advisors across a table laden with casualty reports and economic projections. China had lost 3 major military installations in the orbital bombardment. But more importantly, they'd lost the illusion of sovereignty. The Americans' bravado accomplished nothing except proving we cannot win militarily. Foreign Minister Wang Yi stated flatly. We must consider terms. The Empire wants governance, not genocide. If we negotiate favorable conditions for integration— You mean collaboration? Defense Minister Dong Jun interrupted. You're proposing we become another subjugated system in their empire. What happens to the party? What happens to Chinese civilization? Chinese civilization survives, Wang countered. That's what happens. Jakarta had 29 million people 48 hours ago. Now it has a crater. If they target Shanghai or Beijing with that same demonstration, we lose our population centers, our economy, our ability to govern. We lose everything defending a principle they can erase from orbit. Premier Li listened to the debate, his expression unreadable. He was thinking about something the Empire might not understand about Earth's political structures. The United States could afford moral stands. They were geographically protected, their nuclear infrastructure distributed. China was different. Concentrated population centers, centralized governance. One well-placed orbital strike could decapitate the entire leadership structure. We will not surrender unilaterally, Li finally said. But we will open back-channel communications, feel them out, understand their terms. If other nations choose submission, we will not stand alone in defiance. China has survived 5,000 years of history. We will survive this by being pragmatic, not proud. The decision rippled through diplomatic channels within hours. China was seeking terms. Once the second-largest nuclear power began negotiating surrender, the calculus changed for every other nation. In Moscow, President Dmitry Volkov faced a different calculation. Russia had already lost more military infrastructure than any other nation. Their dispersed Siberian bases were easy targets for orbital bombardment. But Volkov was a former intelligence officer who understood leverage, and he'd noticed something the panicked diplomatic corps had missed. They're negotiating, he told his Security Council, pulling up intercepted communications between Chinese officials and what appeared to be imperial intermediaries. Beijing is already discussing terms, which means the Empire wants willing subjects, not scorched earth. They could destroy us all from orbit, but they're offering surrender terms. Why? FSB Director Sergei Kozlov understood immediately. Because they're too far from their territory. 7 ships, maybe 10,000 personnel at most. They can destroy our cities, but they cannot occupy 7 billion people with 10,000 soldiers. They need us to police ourselves. Exactly. Volkov smiled without humor. Which means we have more leverage than Jakarta suggested. They need compliant governments to maintain order. That compliance comes at a price. He turned to his foreign minister. Open communications, but make clear Russia does not kneel easily. If they want our cooperation, they will grant concessions, autonomy in domestic affairs, protection from rival nations, technology transfer. Make them understand that willing subjects are more valuable than terrorized ones. It was pragmatism dressed as resistance. Surrender wrapped in negotiation. But it was survival. And that's what mattered. President Morrison received the intelligence reports from CIA Director Chen with mounting frustration. China was negotiating. Russia was demanding concessions. Dozens of smaller nations were signaling willingness to accept imperial authority if it meant avoiding Jakarta's fate. The unified front that had launched the nuclear strike was disintegrating less than a day after its failure. "We're losing them," she said to her cabinet. "Every hour that passes, more nations break ranks. If this continues, we'll be isolated. The only major power still resisting while the Empire picks us apart from orbit." Secretary of State Vance leaned forward, her voice urgent. Then we need to change the equation. We can't beat them in direct combat. We proved that. But what if we don't fight them head-on? What if we make occupation too costly? General Webb caught on immediately. Asymmetric warfare. Guerrilla resistance. They can destroy our military installations, but they can't hunt down every civilian with a rifle. If they want to govern Earth, they need to come down from orbit. And when they do, we make them bleed for every city block. Morrison finished. The words tasted like ash. She was discussing turning her entire nation, potentially the entire planet, into an insurgency against technologically superior occupiers. It meant years of bloodshed, decades possibly. But it also meant not surrendering without exhausting every option. Get me the Joint Chiefs, CIA, and anyone who's fought counterinsurgency operations, she ordered. If we're going to resist, we need to be smart about it. And we need to do it fast, before the rest of the world decides submission is easier. Aboard the Inexorable, Captain Thrask was discovering that crushing primitive resistance was more complicated than Admiral Corlin had anticipated. Intelligence reports flooding in from their limited probe network showed that Earth's response to Jakarta's destruction wasn't unified capitulation. It was fracturing chaos with dangerous implications. Sir, we're detecting increased guerrilla activity globally, Lieutenant Vex reported, highlighting red zones across the holographic Earth. Multiple nations are dispersing their remaining military assets. Weapons caches being hidden in civilian population centers. Strategic infrastructure being hardened or relocated. They're preparing for protracted resistance. Thrask studied the patterns with growing concern. They're adapting. They saw they can't fight us in conventional warfare, so they're transitioning to insurgency doctrine. Admiral Corlin wanted a quick demonstration followed by surrender. Instead, we've created a planet-wide resistance movement. Several governments are requesting negotiations, Vex added. China, Russia, and 37 smaller nations have signaled willingness to discuss terms. But the major Western powers, United States, European Union, most of South America, are refusing contact. And we're detecting massive civilian militia mobilizations in those regions. Admiral Corlin arrived on the bridge, her expression thunderous. She'd seen the reports. 7 billion people could not be pacified with 7 Star Destroyers and 50,000 Stormtroopers. The math was brutal. Even if every Imperial soldier killed 1,000 insurgents, an impossible ratio, they'd still face overwhelming numbers. And that assumed the Empire's ground forces could deploy without taking catastrophic casualties. This is why you don't give primitives time to organize. She snapped at Thrask, as if this had been his failure. We should have hit 12 cities immediately, broken their will completely. With respect, Admiral, that might have made things worse. Killed too many, and we have no population left to govern. Right now, half the planet wants to negotiate. That's half the battle won without firing another shot. Corlin glared at him, but couldn't dispute the logic. Then we accelerate the timetable. Accept surrenders from willing nations immediately. Establish imperial governance in those territories. Use them as bases to pressure the holdouts. If America wants to resist, let them watch half the world accepting our rule and prospering under it. It was sound strategy, but Thrask saw the deeper problem. The moment Imperial stormtroopers landed on Earth, the insurgency would begin. And nothing in their training had prepared his troops for fighting an entire planet's population in their home territory. The Empire had conquered advanced civilizations, planets with deflector shields, automated defenses, sophisticated military doctrine. But Earth was different. 7 billion primitives with billions of small arms, intimate knowledge of their terrain, and apparently no shortage of courage or desperation. This was going to get bloody. And for the first time in his Imperial career, Captain Thrask wasn't certain his side would win. The first formal surrender came from Indonesia, what remained of it after Jakarta's destruction. With their capital obliterated and 15 million refugees flooding neighboring regions, the provisional government had no choice. Admiral Corlin accepted their capitulation with clinical efficiency. Imperial governance would be established, local authorities would maintain order under Imperial supervision, and resources would be allocated for reconstruction at the Empire's discretion. Within hours, 12 more nations followed. Smaller countries without nuclear arsenals or significant military capability. They'd watched Jakarta burn and made the calculation that survival trumped sovereignty. The Empire offered them protection from rival nations, technological advancement in exchange for loyalty. And most importantly, they'd be spared the orbital bombardment that awaited resistors. The pattern established a grim precedent. Nations that surrendered early received favorable terms. Those that resisted would face escalating consequences. It was textbook Imperial doctrine: divide and conquer, reward compliance, punish defiance. But the major powers weren't falling in line. The United States, European Union, Russia, despite their negotiations, they hadn't formally surrendered. Japan, Australia, and most of South America maintained their resistance. Collectively, they represented 3 billion people and most of Earth's advanced military-industrial capacity. President Morrison addressed the resistors in an encrypted global conference. Leaders from 27 nations appeared on her screens, some in bunkers, some in mobile command centers, all united by their refusal to submit. "They're trying to divide us," Morrison stated, offering generous terms to early surrenders, threatening annihilation for holdouts. Standard psychological warfare. But here's what they're not telling you. They can't govern a planet this size without our cooperation. Every city they destroy is one less resource center. Every population they terrorize is millions more insurgents. They need us to police ourselves, which means we have leverage. French President Emmanuel Tessier spoke up from his secure location beneath the Élysée Palace. Leverage means nothing if they decide to make examples of Paris, New York, or Moscow. Jakarta proved they're willing to massacre millions to make a point. Jakarta also proved they're limited, Morrison countered. It's been 6 hours since their ultimatum expired. If they wanted to destroy us, they'd have hit multiple cities by now. Instead, they're accepting surrenders and setting up governance structures. They're playing a long game because they have to. 7 ships cannot occupy a planet of billions. British Prime Minister James Whitmore nodded slowly. So we make occupation impossible. Guerrilla warfare, sabotage, constant attrition. But that means civilian casualties, massive ones. Are we prepared for that? The question hung in the encrypted air. Every leader on the call understood what they were proposing, turning their nations into combat zones where the line between soldier and civilian would blur into irrelevance, where schools might become weapons caches, where hospitals might hide resistance fighters, where every Imperial patrol would face potential ambush from any direction. I've already authorized dispersal of military equipment to civilian resistance cells, Morrison said quietly. Rifles, explosives, communications gear, anything that isn't orbital strike vulnerable. We're training militia units in every state. When the Empire lands ground forces, and they will have to eventually, we'll be ready. It won't be clean, and it won't be quick, but we can make them bleed for every inch of territory. One by one, the Allied leaders signaled agreement. The insurgency was official policy now. Earth's resistance would become a grinding, brutal campaign that would make the Empire's occupation untenable. What none of them knew was that Captain Thrask was listening to every word. Imperial probe droids had infiltrated Earth's communication networks hours ago, breaking encryption that had seemed unbreakable by terrestrial standards. He heard Morrison's strategy. He heard the agreement among resistor nations. And he understood with absolute clarity that this was about to become the bloodiest occupation in Imperial history. "Admiral, you need to hear this," he said, routing the intercepted communications to Corlen's command station. She listened in silence, her expression growing colder with each passing minute. When Morrison finished outlining the insurgency strategy, Corlen cut the feed and turned to Thrask with absolute certainty in her eyes. "Then we don't occupy," she said. "We can't police 7 billion insurgents with our current forces. But we can make an example so terrible that resistance becomes unthinkable. Captain, how many major cities would we need to destroy before the remainder surrenders unconditionally?" Thrask felt ice in his veins. "Admiral, you're proposing mass casualties on a scale that breaks their will completely. Jakarta was a demonstration. Now we show them what absolute defiance costs. 5 cities, 10, however many it takes until they beg for the mercy of Imperial rule." Her smile was a razor edge. "They want to make occupation costly. We'll make resistance extinction. That would violate every Imperial protocol for. The Emperor is not here, Captain. I am. And I will not lose 7 Star Destroyers to an extended guerrilla campaign on a backwater planet. We break them now, or we lose slowly. Choose." Thrask stood at the precipice of the decision that would define him. Follow orders and participate in genocide that would dwarf anything in human history, or refuse and face court-martial, execution, or worse, knowing his replacement would carry out the same orders. He thought about Jakarta. 4 million dead in 10 seconds. Now multiply that by 5, 10, 20 cities. The numbers became abstract, too large for the mind to process as individual lives. That's how it happened. That's how good soldiers committed atrocities, when the scale became too vast for empathy to reach. "I need 6 hours to prepare target packages," he finally said, hating himself for the words. "You have 3, Corlen replied. "Then we teach Earth what Empire truly means." The long night was ending, and the true nightmare was about to begin. Captain Thrask retreated to his private quarters, a cramped space by civilian standards, but luxurious compared to standard crew accommodations. He sealed the door and stood before the viewport, staring at the blue-green world rotating beneath him. From this distance, Earth looked peaceful, beautiful even. The lights of cities sparkled across the night side like scattered stars, each one representing millions of lives that had no idea what was coming. He pulled up the target package on his personal datapad. Admiral Corlen wanted maximum psychological impact with minimal strategic value lost, cities large enough to terrify, but not so critical that their destruction would collapse Earth's remaining governance structures entirely. The algorithm had selected them based on population density, symbolic importance, and geographic distribution. New York City, 20 million in the metropolitan area. London, 14 million. Sao Paulo, 22 million. Mumbai, 21 million. Tokyo, 38 million. 5 cities, 115 million lives. The Empire would call it pacification through demonstration. History would call it genocide. And Captain Dax Thrask would be the man who pressed the button. He'd followed orders his entire career. 23 years of service, rising from junior lieutenant to Star Destroyer captain through competence, loyalty, and the willingness to do what the Empire required. He'd bombarded rebel installations. He'd hunted Jedi survivors. He'd enforced blockades that starved populations into submission. All of it justified by the greater order the Empire brought to a chaotic galaxy. But this felt different. Those previous campaigns had been against people who knew the Empire existed, who'd chosen their resistance with full understanding of the consequences. Earth was different. They'd known about the Galactic Empire for 72 hours. They'd defended their home with the weapons they had. And now the Empire would slaughter over 100 million of them for the crime of not immediately surrendering to an invader they'd never heard of 3 days ago. Thrask's hand moved to the secure comm unit on his desk. He could contact Imperial Command in the core worlds, request confirmation of the order. But they were too far away. Communications through the anomaly that had brought them here were unreliable at best, impossible at worst. Admiral Corlin had operational authority, and she'd made her decision clear. He could refuse. Mutiny was punishable by execution. But would that be worse than participating in this? The problem was that refusing wouldn't save those cities. Corlin would simply replace him with his second officer, who'd carry out the bombardment without the same moral hesitation. His conscience would be clear, but the casualties would be identical. A soft chime at his door interrupted the spiral of his thoughts. "Enter." Lieutenant Vex stepped inside, his young face troubled. "Sir, The crew is talking about the target package. Sir, that's over 100 million casualties in one engagement." "I'm aware of the numbers, Lieutenant. With respect, sir, some of the junior officers are questioning the order. They're asking if this violates Imperial rules of engagement for pre-contact civilizations. They're asking if..." Vex hesitated, then plunged forward. "They're asking if this is legal, sir." Thrask turned from the viewport to face his subordinate. Vex was 26, a product of the Imperial Academy, trained to follow orders without question. But he was also human, and humans had limits to what they could rationalize. "The Admiral has operational authority," Thrask said carefully. "Her orders are legal by definition of her rank and position." "But sir, Section 7 of the Imperial Military Code states that officers have a duty to refuse illegal orders. Mass civilian casualties without strategic military necessity." "Are you a lawyer now, Lieutenant?" Thrask's voice hardened. "Are you qualified to interpret Imperial law in a situation without precedent? Because if you're considering refusal, I need to know now." Vex straightened, the Academy training reasserting itself. "No, sir. I'll follow orders. I just wanted you to know what the crew is feeling, sir." After Vex left, Thrask sat in darkness, thinking about the word precedent. That's what this would become if he followed through. Not just a single atrocity, but the template for how the Empire handled newly discovered pre-contact worlds. Threaten, demonstrate, then annihilate until submission was achieved. Every captain who came after him would cite this engagement as justification for their own massacres. He made his decision. It was the wrong decision by every moral standard he'd once believed in. But it was the only decision that kept his crew alive and maintained his ability to potentially mitigate further bloodshed. He would carry out the bombardment. He would live with what that made him. And if they somehow survived this campaign and returned to Imperial space, he would resign his commission and spend whatever remained of his life trying to reconcile what he was about to do. 3 hours later, he returned to the bridge and transmitted the target package to the fleet. 5 Star Destroyers moved into bombardment positions, their turbolaser batteries powering up with the familiar green glow. Admiral Corlin stood at the center of the command deck, watching the preparations with satisfaction. "Captain Thrask, status?" "All vessels in position, Admiral. Targeting solutions locked. We can execute on your command." His voice was professionally neutral, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. "Excellent. But first, we give them one final chance." Corlin activated the planetary broadcast system. Her face would appear on every screen, every device capable of receiving a signal. "People of Earth, this is Admiral Corlin of the Galactic Empire. In 3 hours, we will commence orbital bombardment of 5 major cities unless your governments surrender unconditionally. New York, London, São Paulo, Mumbai, and Tokyo have been designated for destruction. 115 million lives hang in the balance. Your resistance has accomplished nothing except delaying the inevitable. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your nations are fracturing. Some have already accepted the wisdom of imperial rule. The rest of you now face a choice. Surrender within 3 hours, or watch your greatest cities burn. The Empire's patience is exhausted. Choose extinction or choose order. You have 3 hours. The transmission ended, and across Earth, chaos erupted. In New York City, the evacuation order went out immediately. 8 million people tried to flee Manhattan simultaneously, creating traffic paralysis that would have been comical if the stakes weren't apocalyptic. Bridges and tunnels became choked arteries of humanity, desperately fleeing toward... where? 3 hours wasn't enough time to clear the metropolitan area. The best they could do was get as many people as possible out of the densest zones and into shelters. Mayor Sarah Chen stood in the Emergency Operations Center beneath City Hall, watching the traffic cameras with helpless rage. They'd planned for terrorist attacks, for hurricanes, for every disaster Earth could generate. No one had planned for this. "How many can we evacuate in 3 hours?" she asked. "Maybe 2 million if we're lucky," her emergency director replied. "The rest either can't get out in time or won't make it far enough to survive the blast radius. Ma'am, we're looking at 6 million casualties minimum." Chen picked up the direct line to President Morrison. "Madam President, are we surrendering?" Morrison's voice was strained. "I'm trying to coordinate with the other targeted nations. But Sarah, I don't think we can do it. Corlin isn't negotiating, she's executing. Even if we surrendered right now, I'm not sure she'd stop the attack. She wants terror, not compliance." "Then what do I tell 8 million people? Tell them to run. Tell them to pray. Tell them I'm sorry." Morrison's voice cracked. "Sarah, I'm so damn sorry." Similar scenes played out in London, São Paulo, Mumbai, and Tokyo. Millions fleeing. Millions more trapped by geography or circumstance. Emergency services overwhelmed. Governments paralyzed between the impulse to surrender and the certainty that surrender wouldn't save those cities anyway. In Moscow, President Volkov made a calculated decision. He opened a direct channel to the inexorable, using the communications protocol the Empire had provided for negotiations. "Admiral Corlin, this is President Volkov of the Russian Federation. Russia formally surrenders to imperial authority. We accept all terms previously offered. In exchange, we request you remove Russian cities from your target list and demonstrate your willingness to honor negotiated surrenders." Corlin's face appeared on his screen, her expression unreadable. "An interesting proposal, President Volkov. But Russia has no cities on our current target list. Then add one. Moscow, 20 million people. prove that surrender protects us, and you'll have half the planet begging for terms by nightfall. Or destroy cities indiscriminately, and you prove that submission offers no safety. Which serves your goals better? It was a gambit born of desperation and cold logic. Volkov was betting that the Empire actually wanted compliant subjects, not scorched earth. That demonstrating mercy toward those who surrendered would fracture the resistance faster than demonstrating terror toward those who didn't. Corlin considered it for exactly 5 seconds. Moscow is removed from consideration. Russia will establish a provisional imperial government within 72 hours. Compliance will be monitored. Failure to meet imperial standards will result in reconsideration of our agreement. Are these terms acceptable? Acceptable, Volkov said, feeling like he'd just sold his nation's soul, which he had. But 20 million Muscovites would live to see tomorrow because of it. The broadcast went out within minutes. Russia had surrendered and been spared. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating to the resistance. If surrender meant survival and resistance meant annihilation, what nation could justify choosing the latter? Within 90 minutes of Corlin's ultimatum, 17 more nations formally surrendered. Not the major powers targeted for destruction, but significant nations nonetheless. Brazil tried to negotiate terms after São Paulo was listed for destruction, but Corlin rejected them. They'd had their chance to surrender early. Now they would learn the cost of delayed compliance. President Morrison, Prime Minister Whitmore, and the leaders of India and Japan faced an impossible choice. They could surrender and save their cities, but doom their nations to imperial rule. Or they could refuse and accept that millions would die in the next hour for a resistance that looked increasingly futile. Morrison made the call to Whitmore first. James, I can't do this. I can't sacrifice 6 million New Yorkers for principle. We're surrendering. Catherine, if we surrender now, after all this, we prove that terror works, that any sufficiently ruthless enemy can break us. They already broke us. Morrison's composure shattered. Jakarta broke us. We just didn't want to admit it. We tried to fight. We failed. Now we either surrender or we're responsible for another 100 million dead. I won't carry that. Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Then we surrender together. Unified coalition terms. We maintain domestic governance. They get strategic oversight. We keep our military structure but under imperial command authority. We negotiate the best deal we can for total capitulation. It was over. The resistance had lasted less than 4 days. From first contact to total surrender, Earth's independence had crumbled in 96 hours. The joint statement went out with 1 hour remaining on Corlin's deadline. The United States, United Kingdom, European Union, India, and Japan formally surrendered to the Galactic Empire. They requested terms. They agreed to cease all resistance. They pleaded for the bombardment to be canceled. Admiral Corlin received the surrender with cold satisfaction. She'd broken them. Terra, the Empire would rename it, of course, would become another jewel in the Emperor's crown. The entire planet brought to heel in under a week. Her career would be secured by this achievement. Admiral, do we cancel the bombardment? Thrask asked, hoping desperately for a yes. Cancel it? Captain, are you mad? Corlin turned to him with genuine confusion. This surrender came under duress of immediate destruction. If we don't follow through, we teach them that last-minute capitulation negates consequences. No. We strike one city, pour encourager les autres. Let them understand that surrender must come early and completely, or it comes too late. Admiral, that's necessary, Captain. Choose which city burns. That's your punishment for questioning me. You pick which 6 million die to establish Imperial credibility. Thrask looked at the list. New York, London, Sao Paulo, Mumbai, Tokyo. 5 cities full of people who had just surrendered, who believed compliance would save them. He was being ordered to murder millions who'd done everything the Empire demanded, simply to make a point. This was the moment. This was where he drew the line or surrendered his humanity entirely. No, he said quietly. Excuse me? No, Admiral. I refuse the order. This violates Imperial law regarding surrendered populations. Section 7, Article 12 of the Imperial Military Code. I cannot and will not follow through with this bombardment. The bridge went silent. Every officer and crew member heard what their captain had just done. Mutiny. Open refusal of a direct order from a superior officer. It was career suicide. It was potentially actual suicide. Admiral Corland's smile was razor-thin and absolutely without warmth. Captain Thrask, you are relieved of command. Security, place the captain in the brig, pending court-martial. Commander Srell, you are acting captain of the Inexorable. Execute the bombardment order. Choose your target. Commander Srell, a CHIS officer with the cold efficiency his species was known for, stepped forward without hesitation. Tokyo, Admiral. Largest population, highest strategic value, maximum demonstration impact. Excellent. Proceed. Thrask was escorted off the bridge by 4 stormtroopers, their blasters not yet drawn but ready. He'd thrown away his career, his future, possibly his life. For what? The bombardment would proceed. Millions would die. His sacrifice would accomplish nothing except slightly delaying the inevitable. But as the turbo laser batteries powered up to destroy Tokyo, Lieutenant Vex made eye contact with 3 other junior officers. They'd all heard their captain refuse an illegal order. They'd all been thinking the same thing, but lacked the courage to act. Sometimes, courage is contagious. Admiral, turbo laser batteries report a malfunction, Vex said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Safety systems are engaging. We cannot fire. Corland spun toward him. What? Unknown technical issue, ma'am. Multiple batteries reporting simultaneous system failures. It's unprecedented. It was also a lie. A lie that 6 junior officers were coordinating in real time, entering false error codes into systems they'd been trained to maintain. A lie that would be discovered in minutes. But minutes might be enough. Get engineering teams on it now. I want those batteries operational in... The explosion rocked the Inexorable, throwing crew members against consoles. Alarms shrieked across the ship as a secondary detonation rippled through the port power distribution system. It wasn't a catastrophic hit, but it was enough to trigger automatic safety shutdowns across the weapons grid. On Earth, President Morrison received the flash traffic from NSA. Imperial flagship experiencing apparent technical difficulties. Bombardment delayed. Status unknown. She didn't know why the Empire's ship was having problems. She didn't know that Captain Thrask had refused orders or that his crew was risking everything to back him up. All she knew was that millions of people who'd been seconds from death suddenly had a chance to live. It wouldn't last. The Empire would restore their systems, discover the sabotage, execute the saboteurs. But for this moment, this fragile borrowed moment, Earth's surrender had been accepted without the final atrocity Corland had planned. Sometimes, that's what resistance looks like. Not grand military victories. Just buying enough time for mercy to sneak through the cracks in tyranny. The operation had a name within 4 hours. Operation Fallen Star. It was optimistic, bordering on delusional. But General Webb had learned that impossible missions sometimes succeeded simply because the enemy couldn't conceive of anyone being crazy enough to attempt them. The plan was elegantly simple and horrifically dangerous. Captain Thrask would pilot his stolen Imperial shuttle back toward the inexorable, broadcasting standard reconnaissance protocols and IFF codes that identified him as a returning survey mission. Hidden in the shuttle's cargo bay would be a modified payload, not nuclear warheads, which the shields would easily deflect, but something the Empire's sensors wouldn't immediately recognize as a threat. Dr. Rachel Kim, the materials scientist who'd analyzed the crashed probe in the Amazon, had spent the last 6 hours working with Thrask on a weapons system the Empire had never encountered. Kinetic penetrators designed specifically to exploit the shield vulnerability he'd described. Depleted uranium rods, each weighing 200 pounds, equipped with minimal guidance systems and cold gas thrusters for final approach. Slow enough to pass through shields designed to stop high-velocity threats, dense enough to punch through the relatively light armor protecting shield generators. "It's medieval," Dr. Kim said as she supervised the loading. "We're essentially throwing spears at a spaceship. Very, very expensive spears moving at barely 1,000 meters per second. Sometimes the oldest solutions work best," Thrask replied, checking the shuttle systems. "Imperial doctrine assumes enemies will use energy weapons or missiles. These," he gestured at the kinetic rods, "these don't fit the expected threat profile. By the time they realize what's happening, the rods will be through the shields." "And then what?" "You said taking out the shield generators is only the first step. Then the real attack begins. Once the shields are down, your conventional weapons, missiles, railguns, whatever you can get into orbit, will have a window to hit the exposed hull. Target the main reactor or the bridge tower. Either one creates a catastrophic kill." Thrask's voice was clinical, discussing the destruction of his former command as if it were a tactical exercise rather than an act that would kill 3,000 crew members he'd served alongside. Lieutenant Vex approached, having been cleared by Earth's intelligence services after hours of interrogation. "Sir, I'm coming with you." "Negative. You've done enough. If this fails, at least you'll survive to..." "To what?" "Live the rest of my life knowing I let my captain fly a suicide mission alone?" "Sir, I've been your sensor officer for 3 years. You need someone monitoring Imperial comm channels and tracking their defensive posture. You need me." Thrask wanted to argue, but Vex was right. 2 crew members doubled their chances, minimal as those chances were. "Get aboard. We launch in 90 minutes." While the shuttle prepared, a different drama was unfolding in orbit. Aboard the Inexorable, Admiral Corlin had completed her investigation into the engineering accident and reached conclusions that filled her with cold fury. The system failures had been deliberate. Multiple junior officers had coordinated the sabotage. And Captain Thrask's escape in the confusion had been facilitated, not accidental. Commander Srel stood before her in the conference room, his red Chiss eyes impassive as she paced. "Mutiny on my flagship, under my command. Captain Thrask has fled to the surface, presumably to offer intelligence to the enemy." How many others were involved? At least 6 confirmed participants in the sabotage. Possibly more who provided passive assistance by not reporting suspicious activity. Srel pulled up personnel files. All junior officers, all assigned to critical systems. They knew exactly what they were doing. Execute them, publicly. I want the crew to understand what happens to traitors. "Admiral, with respect, that may be counterproductive. If we execute 6 officers for refusing to bombard a surrendered population, we risk creating martyrs. The crew is unsettled. Many privately questioned the order to strike Tokyo after Earth's capitulation. Captain Thrask's refusal resonated with them. Corlin stopped pacing and fixed Srel with a glare that could cut Dura steel. Are you suggesting my crew is on the verge of mutiny? I'm suggesting the crew is questioning whether we're following Imperial law or simply your interpretation of it. There's a difference, Admiral. One that matters when we're beyond oversight from command. It was the closest a subordinate officer could come to openly criticizing a superior without crossing into insubordination. Corlin understood the message. Her authority was intact, but it was no longer absolute. If she pushed too hard, she might face organized resistance rather than isolated dissent. Fine. The traitors will be held for court-martial when we return to Imperial space. But I want Thrask found. He has detailed knowledge of our systems, our protocols, our vulnerabilities. In enemy hands, that information is more dangerous than their nuclear arsenal. Deploy probe droids across the planet. Find him and eliminate him before he can cause more damage. Already underway, Admiral. But there's another concern. Srel pulled up the sensor logs. We detected an unauthorized launch from the planet's surface 16 hours ago. Multiple conventional rockets carrying what appear to be weapons platforms into low orbit. They're maintaining radio silence and minimal power signatures, trying to hide among the orbital debris. But they're there. Weapons platforms? They're preparing another attack? Unclear. The platforms are primitive. Earth technology, not Imperial. They appear to be waiting, positioning themselves in orbital paths that will bring them near our fleet over the next 12 to 18 hours. Corlin studied the trajectories, her tactical mind immediately seeing the pattern. They're setting up an ambush. They think they can hurt us with orbital weapons. Destroy them. That would reveal we've detected them, Admiral. If we leave them in place, we can monitor their communications, potentially learn their operational plans. And frankly, their weapons aren't a threat to our shields. Let them waste their resources on a futile gesture. We can swat them down whenever we choose. It was sound tactical advice. Corlin nodded slowly. Monitor them closely, but prepare to destroy any platform that moves into direct attack position. I want no surprises. What neither Corlin nor Srel knew was that those weapons platforms were a deliberate diversion. Earth's actual counterstrike, Operation Fallen Star, would come from the one-vector Imperial tactical doctrine considered secure. From inside their own identification protocols, flying one of their own shuttles. Thrask ran his pre-flight checks for the 3rd time, his hands moving through the familiar routines with muscle memory built over 2 decades of Imperial service. The shuttle was fueled, the kinetic penetrators were loaded and armed, and the IFF transponder was broadcasting his legitimate command codes. Everything was ready except his conscience, which kept showing him the faces of crew members he was about to kill. Sir, incoming transmission from President Morrison, Vex said from the co-pilot station. Morrison's face appeared on the small screen. Captain Thrask, I wanted to speak with you before you launch, to make sure you understand what you're doing. With respect, Madam President, I understand perfectly. I'm committing treason, destroying my former command, and likely dying in the process. You're also giving us hope. That matters more than you might think. But I need you to know, if you succeed, the Empire will retaliate. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Corlin's replacement might be more reasonable, but the Empire itself won't forget that a primitive world destroyed one of their capital ships. there will be consequences. There are always consequences, Madam President. The question is whether we have the courage to accept them. You chose resistance, knowing it might mean extinction. I'm making the same choice. Morrison nodded slowly. Then Godspeed, Captain. Or may the Force be with you. Whichever one you believe in. I believe in neither, Madam President. But I believe in the possibility that doing the right thing matters, even when it's futile. That's faith enough. The transmission ended. Thrask looked at Vex. Last chance to back out, Lieutenant. Already committed, sir. Let's go kill some Imperials. The shuttle lifted off from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base under cover of darkness, its repulsor lift engines singing the familiar high-pitched whine that Thrask had heard on 1,000 planets. Earth dropped away beneath them as they climbed toward the stars, toward the Imperial task force that considered itself invulnerable, toward a confrontation that would prove whether courage could overcome technology. IF interrogation from the inexorable, Vex reported. They're asking for status and mission log. Thrask activated the comm system, speaking in the clipped military tone he'd used for 23 years. ISB Shuttle 773 to inexorable command. Returning from extended surface reconnaissance. Request approach clearance and docking priority. There was a pause. Thrask counted his heartbeats, wondering if they'd already been identified as hostiles. Then the response came through, cold and professional. Shuttle 773, you are not listed on authorized departure logs. Explain deviation from protocol. Special reconnaissance mission authorized by Captain Thrask prior to his departure. We were in the field during the security incident and proceeded with our assigned survey of urban population centers. Another pause, longer this time. Thrask could imagine the duty officer checking logs, consulting with security, trying to decide if this was legitimate or suspicious. Finally, Shuttle 773, maintain your current trajectory. You are cleared for approach, but will be boarded by security upon docking. Any deviation from flight path will be met with defensive fire. Understood, inexorable. Proceeding as instructed. Vex looked at him. They're suspicious, but not alarmed. We might actually get close enough. Close enough is all we need. Thrask adjusted their approach vector, bringing them into a trajectory that would pass within 300 meters of the inexorable's shield generators, close enough for the kinetic penetrators to reach their targets with minimal thruster correction, far enough that the shuttle wouldn't be immediately identified as a threat. Behind them, hidden among the orbital debris and dead satellites, Earth's hastily deployed weapons platforms began powering up their targeting systems. Railguns salvaged from naval vessels. Missiles adapted from ground-based defense systems. Conventional kinetic weapons that would normally be useless against Imperial shields. But if Thrask succeeded in taking those shields down, even for 60 seconds, Earth would have its chance. One opportunity to prove that humanity could hurt the invaders. One moment where David's sling might actually strike Goliath. The shuttle closed the distance. 300 kilometers. 200. 100. Thrask could see the inexorable now with his naked eyes. The familiar wedge shape, the familiar gray hull, the familiar bridge tower, where he'd stood 1,000 times. 50 kilometers, Vex said quietly. They're not scrambling intercept fighters. I think they actually believe we're a legitimate reconnaissance flight. They believe because they want to. Imperial doctrine doesn't account for defectors flying suicide missions. It's outside their threat assessment matrix. Thrask's hands moved to the weapons release controls. Prepare kinetic deployment on my mark. Target packages Alpha, Beta, and Gamma, the 3 primary shield generator domes. Packages armed and ready. 20 kilometers, close enough to see the individual turbolaser batteries. Close enough to read the hull identification markings, close enough that any deviation from flight path would trigger immediate defensive response. Deploy, Thrask ordered. The shuttle's cargo bay doors opened, and 12 kinetic penetrators drifted out into space, their cold gas thrusters firing minimal corrections to aim them at the 3 shield generator domes. From a distance, they looked like debris, certainly not like weapons. Their low velocity meant Imperial sensors categorized them as negligible threats if they were detected at all. Rods away, Vex confirmed. Impact in 30 seconds. Sir, they're launching TIE fighters. They know something's wrong. They know too late. Thrask pushed the shuttle into evasive maneuvers, buying the kinetic penetrators precious seconds to reach their targets. All Earth forces. This is Fallen Star. Weapons deployed, impact imminent. Stand by for shield collapse. The first kinetic rod struck the forward shield generator dome, doing exactly what depleted uranium was designed to do. Punch through armor with pure mass and velocity. The generator exploded in a cascade of sparks and venting atmosphere. The second and third rods hit their targets within 2 seconds. And suddenly, the inexorable's shields flickered and died as the entire defensive network crashed from catastrophic overload. For 60 seconds, maybe less, the flagship of Admiral Corlen's task force was vulnerable, and Earth's hidden weapons platforms opened fire with everything they had. The inexorable had faced rebels, pirates, and organized military forces across a dozen systems. It had weathered turbolaser barrages from enemy capital ships and survived coordinated fighter strikes from experienced pilots. But it had never faced what Earth threw at it in those 60 seconds of vulnerability. The desperate, improvised fury of a species fighting for survival, with weapons cobbled together from 20th century technology and 21st century desperation. The first railgun round, a tungsten penetrator traveling at Mach 7, struck the inexorable's exposed hull amidships, punching through armor plating designed to resist energy weapons, but never tested against pure kinetic impact at hypersonic velocity. The round penetrated 3 decks before its energy dissipated, killing 17 crew members and venting 2 compartments to space. Then the rest of Earth's orbital ambush unleashed hell. Missiles adapted from Tomahawk cruise systems, never designed for space combat, but functional enough when guidance systems locked onto a target 300 meters long. Converted naval artillery shells fired from electromagnetic accelerators that had been space-rated in the last 18 hours. Even a modified SpaceX Dragon capsule that had been packed with high explosives and sent on a collision course with the bridge tower. A kamikaze strike that would have seemed suicidal if the alternative wasn't planetary subjugation. Captain Thrask watched from his shuttle as Earth's weapons tore into his former command. He felt each impact like a physical blow. Knowing every explosion represented crew members dying, people he'd served with, trained with, commanded. But he also felt a terrible satisfaction. The Empire was bleeding. The invincible Star Destroyer was burning. "Sir, we need to get clear," Vex shouted over the proximity alarms. TIE fighters were converging on their position, and without shields of their own, the shuttle wouldn't survive a single hit. The escape pods, not yet. Guide the targeting data to Earth's platforms. Make every shot count. Thrask threw the shuttle into a barrel roll, avoiding a burst of laser fire from a TIE fighter that screamed past their position. The Imperial pilot was good, already looping back for another attack run. Aboard the Inexorable, controlled chaos had erupted into genuine catastrophe. Admiral Corlin stood on the bridge as damage reports flooded in from every section. The forward hangar bay was a fireball. Main power distribution to the port weapons grid was severed. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Casualties mounting by the second. "Get those shields back online," she roared at the engineering station. "Trying, Admiral. The generators are destroyed. We're routing backup power, but it'll take at least 5 minutes to..." An explosion rocked the bridge as one of Earth's missiles struck the command tower's base. The impact threw crew members against their stations. Sparks rained from overhead conduits. And then the lights went dark, replaced by emergency lighting that bathed everything in red. "Bridge power offline," Commander Srell reported with forced calm. Switching to Auxiliary Command Center. "Admiral, we need to withdraw. Pull back to high orbit, out of range of their weapons platforms." "We do not retreat from primitives," Corlin snapped. But even as she said it, another impact shuddered through the ship's superstructure. The inexorable was dying around her, killed not by superior technology, but by desperate ingenuity and a willingness to sacrifice everything for one chance. "Admiral, we've lost primary propulsion. Maneuvering thrusters only. If we don't withdraw now, we won't have the capability to withdraw at all." Corlin's face was a mask of fury, but she wasn't suicidal. "All ships, pull back to high orbit, defensive formation, and someone kill that shuttle." 3 TIE fighters broke off from patrol patterns to pursue Thrask's fleeing shuttle. The Lambda class was faster than it looked, but TIE fighters were faster still. Laser fire stitched across space, bracketing the shuttle as Thrask pushed the engines beyond safe parameters. "We're not going to make it," Vex said, his voice tight. "They're in firing position." Thrask's hand moved to the escape pod controls. "On my mark, eject. 3, 2. The lead TIE fighter exploded, then the second. The third broke off its attack run, spiraling away in evasive maneuvers as something impossible happened. Earth's atmosphere was launching fighters. They were F-22 Raptors, somehow pushed to altitudes they were never designed for, their engines screaming in the thin air, their pilots blacking out from G-forces as they climbed into the edge of space on vapor trails of desperation. They couldn't maintain altitude for more than minutes. Their weapons systems barely functioned in near vacuum. But for those precious minutes, they could engage. "Eagle 1 to unidentified friendly," came the transmission. "We've got your back. Get clear of the combat zone." "Understood, Eagle 1," Thrask replied, banking the shuttle away from the burning Star Destroyer. "Thank you. Thank you, whoever you are. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." The shuttle's escape pods ejected as Thrask aimed the remaining hull at Earth, letting gravity do the work. The shuttle would burn up on re-entry, but the pods were rated for atmospheric insertion. Thrask and Vex would survive to face whatever came next. Behind them, the inexorable was listing, its port side torn open in a dozen places, fires visible through the breaches. Earth's weapons platforms had expended their ammunition. The entire ambush had been a single devastating salvo. Everything humanity could throw into orbit on 18 hours' notice. But it had been enough. The flagship of the Imperial Task Force was crippled, if not destroyed. On Earth, President Morrison watched the satellite footage with something approaching disbelief. They'd done it. Against every expectation, against overwhelming odds. They'd hurt the Empire badly enough that the massive warship was retreating, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. "Ma'am, casualty estimates on the inexorable," General Webb reported. "Preliminary assessment based on damage locations suggests between 800 and 2,000 Imperial personnel killed or wounded. The ship is combat ineffective. it'll take weeks to repair, maybe months without proper shipyard facilities. What about the other Star Destroyers? Pulling back to high orbit, out of range of our remaining orbital assets. They're regrouping, probably trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Webb's grin was savage. Ma'am, we just proved that Earth can fight back. We bloodied their nose. That changes everything. Morrison wanted to share his optimism, but she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. It changes the tactical situation, but strategically, we're still conquered. They still have 6 functional capital ships. They'll retaliate once they recover from the shock. What do we do when they come back? Director Chen spoke up from her position at the intelligence station. We've been monitoring Imperial communications, what little we can decrypt. There's dissent in their ranks. Multiple ships are questioning Admiral Corlin's command decisions. Some are arguing that Earth's resistance proves occupation will be untenable, and they should negotiate rather than escalate. You're saying they might not retaliate? I'm saying their command structure is fractured. Corlin wanted overwhelming force and total subjugation. But her flagship just got torn apart by a species she considered primitive. That damages her credibility. If there are Imperial officers who prefer negotiated compliance over perpetual insurgency, this might be their moment to speak up. The analysis was interrupted by an incoming transmission, broadcast on all frequencies, clearly intended for planetary reception. Commander Srell's blue-skinned Chiss face appeared on screens worldwide, his expression carefully neutral. People of Earth, this is Commander Srell of the Imperial Navy. I am assuming operational command of the Imperial Task Force following the incapacitation of Admiral Corlin's flagship. I am authorized to negotiate revised terms for Earth's integration into the Galactic Empire. He paused, his red eyes seeming to look directly through the camera at every human watching. Your attack on the inexorable was unexpected, effective. It demonstrated capabilities we did not anticipate, and a willingness to sacrifice that we underestimated. These are qualities the Empire can respect. Therefore, I am proposing the following terms. Earth will accept Imperial governance in external affairs and military matters. You will maintain domestic autonomy in internal governance, culture, and economic systems. No further orbital bombardments will occur, provided there are no further attacks on Imperial vessels. Resistance cells will be granted amnesty if they cease hostile operations within 72 hours, and Captain Dax Thrask, who I understand participated in the attack, will be pardoned for his actions in recognition of complex circumstances. Another pause. These terms are significantly more favorable than those offered previously. They reflect the Empire's recognition that Earth is not a primitive world to be crushed, but a civilization capable of sophisticated resistance. Continued warfare benefits neither side. I await your response within 48 hours. Commander Srell, out. The transmission ended, leaving behind a planet trying to process what had just happened. The Empire was negotiating, offering terms that preserved some autonomy, acknowledging that Earth had earned respect through violence. Morrison looked at her advisors. Is this legitimate or a trap? Srell has a reputation, Director Chen said, pulling up intelligence files. He's Chiss, not human, though close enough. His species values tactical efficiency over emotional responses. If he's offering these terms, it's because he's calculated that occupation would cost more than it's worth, given our demonstrated resistance capabilities. So we hurt them badly enough that they're willing to negotiate rather than conquer? Exactly. We proved we can make them bleed. That's the only language empires understand, cost-benefit analysis. If subjugating Earth costs too much in resources and casualties, even a victory becomes a defeat. General Webb leaned forward. Madam President, if we accept these terms, we're still conquered. We're still under Imperial authority. But we'd be alive, autonomous in domestic matters, and positioned to resist more effectively over time. If we refuse and fight on, they might decide to make an example that makes Jakarta look merciful. Morrison felt the weight of the decision crushing down on her. Accept negotiated subjugation and preserve humanity at the cost of independence, or fight on and risk extinction for the sake of freedom. It was the same choice she'd faced 72 hours ago, but now with blood on both sides and a slightly better understanding of what resistance would cost. "Get me Thrask," she said. "If anyone understands how the Empire thinks, it's him. I need to know if Srel is genuine, or if this is just another tactic." Captain Thrask's escape pod had landed in the Atlantic Ocean, retrieved by the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group within 30 minutes. He was now aboard the carrier, wrapped in a thermal blanket, drinking coffee that tasted like liquid salvation after the adrenaline crash of combat. When President Morrison's call came through, he was almost grateful for the distraction from his own thoughts. "Captain Thrask, you saw Commander Srel's broadcast. Is he trustworthy?" Thrask considered the question carefully. "Srel is pragmatic. Chiss culture values results over ideology. If he's offering these terms, it's because he's concluded that total conquest isn't achievable with current resources. That doesn't make him benevolent. It makes him realistic. Can we trust him to honor the terms? As long as they serve Imperial interests, yes. The moment they don't, he'll revise them. But Madam President, these terms are significantly better than anything you would have received under Admiral Corlin. Domestic autonomy is valuable. It means you can maintain your government systems, your laws, your culture. The Empire gets strategic control, your military answers to them, your external relations go through them. But you remain functionally independent in daily life. Until they decide we're not compliant enough and revise the terms. That's always the risk with Empire. But the alternative is continued warfare against an enemy with 6 remaining capital ships and the ability to bombard your cities from orbit. You bloodied them today. You proved resistance is possible. But you can't win a sustained war. Not yet. Maybe not ever, unless you somehow develop technology to match theirs. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then, if we accept these terms, will you help us? Use your knowledge of Imperial systems to prepare for future resistance if it becomes necessary? Thrask smiled without humor. "Madam President, I committed treason and destroyed my former command. I'm never going back to the Empire. If Earth is my new home, then yes. I'll help you prepare for whatever comes next. But I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope Srel means what he says. This becomes a partnership rather than an occupation." "You don't really believe that?" "No," Thrask admitted. "But I believe in the possibility of it. That's enough to try." 40 hours later, President Morrison stood before a joint session of Congress, the first time the body had convened since the invasion began. Behind her, via video link, stood the leaders of every major nation still resisting Imperial authority. And before them all was the document that would define humanity's future, the Earth Imperial Concordat. "We did not choose this war," Morrison said, her voice carrying across the chamber and across the world. "We did not invite invasion. We did not surrender our sovereignty willingly. But we also cannot ignore reality. The Galactic Empire possesses technology centuries beyond ours and military force we cannot match. We can resist. We proved that when we crippled their flagship. But resistance means casualties, means cities destroyed, means generations growing up in war zones. The terms Commander Srel has offered preserve our essential humanity. We maintain our governments, our laws, our way of life. We accept Imperial oversight in external affairs and military matters. We become not a conquered people, but a protected territory. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we deserve. But it's what we can achieve without sacrificing millions more lives. She paused, looking directly into the camera. Some will call this surrender. They're right. Some will call it collaboration. They may also be right. But I call it survival. Survival with dignity. Survival with the possibility that someday, when humanity has grown stronger and wiser, we might renegotiate these terms from a position of true equality. I am recommending we accept the Earth Imperial Concordat. But this decision belongs to all of us. Congress will vote. Other nations will vote, and whatever we decide as a united species. That, at least, is one gift the Empire gave us. They taught us that we're all humans first, and everything else second. The vote took 6 hours. When it concluded, the Concordat had passed with 73% approval. Not unanimity, but enough for legitimacy. One by one, the resistor nations ratified the agreement. Within 24 hours, Earth had officially become an Imperial protectorate. Commander Srel received the acceptance aboard his Star Destroyer, the Relentless. He reviewed the terms one final time, ensuring every clause was properly documented, every obligation clearly stated. It was a good agreement by Imperial standards, one that gave Earth significant autonomy while ensuring Imperial strategic interests were protected. More importantly, it ended a conflict that could have dragged on for years at enormous cost to both sides. The Empire gained a new world, new resources, new subjects. Earth gained protection, technology transfer, and time to adapt to its new reality. Whether this arrangement would last depended on factors Srel couldn't predict. But for now, the war was over. Earth had survived first contact with the Galactic Empire. Barely. Bloodied, but alive. In orbit, the inexorable drifted, undergoing emergency repairs that would take months to complete. Admiral Corlin had been relieved of command, pending investigation into her conduct during the occupation. She'd objected strenuously, of course. But the evidence was damning. Unnecessary civilian casualties, refusal to accept surrender in good faith, and tactical decisions that had led to catastrophic damage to her flagship. The Empire valued results. Corlin's results had been a Pyrrhic victory that cost too much for too little gain. Srel's results had been a negotiated peace that achieved Imperial objectives without further losses. The choice of which approach to reward was obvious. And so Earth entered a new era, an era where humanity knew it wasn't alone, where the stars held both wonder and danger, where independence had been traded for survival. But survival came with the possibility, distant and uncertain, but real, of eventual freedom. The question was whether humanity would use that time to grow stronger or grow comfortable with subjugation. Only the future would tell. But for the first time in 4 days, that future existed at all. That was enough. For now, 6 months after the signing of the Earth Imperial Concordat, the reality of occupation had settled into an uneasy normalcy that felt both alien and disturbingly routine. Imperial administrative centers had been established in every major capital, their architecture a jarring contrast to human buildings. All clean lines, gray durasteel, and the ever-present Imperial insignia that reminded everyone who ultimately held authority. Captain Dax Thrask stood on the observation deck of what had once been the United Nations building in New York, now repurposed as the Imperial Coordination Center for the North American sector. Below him, the city had recovered from the evacuation panic of 6 months ago. Traffic flowed. People went to work. Life continued. Though now with the occasional sight of Imperial probe droids hovering at intersections or stormtrooper patrols marching through Times Square. Strange, isn't it? President Morrison said, joining him at the window. She'd aged visibly in the past 6 months, the weight of compromise and collaboration etching lines into her face. 6 months ago, I was ready to die fighting them. Now I'm attending Imperial administrative meetings and signing off on technology transfer protocols. You're doing what's necessary to keep your people alive, Thrask replied. That's not collaboration. That's leadership under impossible circumstances. Tell that to the resistance cells who've rejected the Concordat. They call me a traitor. They're not entirely wrong. She gestured to the streets below. Commander Srel has been surprisingly reasonable. The occupation is lighter than I expected, but it's still occupation. We're not free. You're not extinct either. That was the alternative. Thrask pulled up a holographic display showing Imperial deployments worldwide. Srel has kept his word. No orbital bombardments, no mass arrests of former military personnel. Technology transfer is proceeding. Medical advances alone have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Earth is being integrated, not exploited. For now. What happens when Earth becomes strategically valuable enough to warrant tighter control? When Srel gets orders from his superiors to crack down? It was the question that haunted every collaborative leader on Earth. The Concordat had bought time and autonomy, but at the price of ultimate Imperial authority. Any rights Earth enjoyed existed at the Empire's pleasure, not as inherent sovereignty. Before Thrask could answer, his comlink chirped. It was Lieutenant Vex, who'd been working with Earth's scientific community to analyze Imperial technology. Sir, we have a situation. You need to get to the research facility immediately. Thrask and Morrison arrived at the former MIT campus 30 minutes later, where a joint human-Imperial research team had been studying the salvaged wreckage of the Inexorable's shield generators. Dr. Rachel Kim met them at the entrance, her expression troubled. We found something in the wreckage, she said without preamble. Something that changes our understanding of why the Empire is here. She led them to a secured laboratory where fragments of Imperial technology had been laid out like archaeological artifacts. One piece in particular drew Thrask's attention, a navigation computer core, partially damaged but still readable. We've been analyzing the hyperspace logs from the Inexorable, Dr. Kim explained, trying to understand exactly how you ended up at Earth. The official story was a random hyperspace anomaly, right? That's what we were told, Thrask confirmed, though a cold feeling was settling into his gut. It wasn't random. Dr. Kim pulled up the navigation data on a holographic display. The anomaly was artificial. Someone created it. Someone with technology even more advanced than the Empire's. And according to these logs, the anomaly didn't just pull the Imperial fleet to Earth. It was specifically calibrated to bring them here. This was deliberate. Morrison stared at the data. You're saying someone wanted the Empire to find Earth? Why? That's what we've been trying to figure out. Dr. Kim zoomed in on energy signatures embedded in the hyperspace trace. These readings don't match any known technology in the Imperial database. They're not force-based. They're something else entirely. something that exists outside both our universe and the Empire's galaxy. Thrask felt pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. A test. Someone is testing us. Testing how humanity reacts to first contact with an aggressive superior force. Testing how the Empire handles an isolated primitive world. We're not random encounters. We're subjects in an experiment. But who has that kind of power? Morrison demanded. Who could manipulate hyperspace, create artificial anomalies, and do it without either Earth or the Empire detecting them? The answer came from an unexpected source. Commander Srel entered the laboratory, his chiss features grave. I believe I can answer that question. Captain Thrask, President Morrison, we need to talk about something the Empire has kept classified for centuries. Something called the Unknown Regions. They reconvened in a secure conference room, where Srel pulled up star charts that showed the Galactic Empire's territory, and the vast expanses beyond it, marked with ominous warnings. The galaxy the Empire controls represents perhaps 40% of the total galactic disk, Srel explained. Beyond our borders lies the Unknown Regions, space that has resisted exploration, that swallows ships, that contains entities we don't fully understand. My people, the Chiss, come from the Unknown Regions. We know there are powers out there that make the Empire look primitive. And you think one of these powers brought us together? Thrask asked. I think it's the only explanation that fits the evidence. Random hyperspace anomalies don't have calibrated energy signatures. They don't conveniently deposit an Imperial task force at a previously unknown inhabited world. This was engineered. Srel's red eyes fixed on each of them in turn. Which means both our civilizations are being watched, studied, possibly manipulated. Morrison felt her already tenuous grip on reality slipping further. So, the invasion, the war, the Concordat, all of it might have been orchestrated by some unknown third party. To what end? Unknown. But consider what they've observed. Humanity's capacity for resistance against overwhelming odds. The Empire's struggle to pacify a determined but technologically inferior population. The compromise we reached and how we're implementing it. If I were studying first contact scenarios, this would be a fascinating case study. And if they're studying us, Thrask said quietly, that means they might still be here, watching, waiting to see what we do next. The implications settled over the room like a dark cloud. For 6 months, Earth had been focused on adapting to Imperial occupation. The Empire had been focused on integrating a new protectorate. Neither had considered that they might both be pawns in a larger game. We need to find out who's watching us, Morrison said, and we need to do it without panicking the population or alerting whatever entities might be observing. Agreed, Srel said. I'm authorizing a joint investigation. Human and Imperial scientists working together. Captain Thrask, I want you to lead it. You understand both perspectives, and you've proven you can think outside Imperial doctrine. Thrask nodded slowly. I'll need access to the Inexorable's complete sensor logs from our arrival. Every reading, every anomaly, everything we might have dismissed as instrument error. You'll have it. But Captain, if we discover that something deliberately engineered first contact between Earth and the Empire, we'll need to decide what to do with that information. Do we share it publicly? Do we prepare for potential further contact? Do we assume hostile intent? We assume nothing, Morrison interjected. But we prepare for everything. If there are powers out there capable of manipulating both our civilizations, we need to be ready. Together. It was a strange alliance. former enemies united by the realization that they might both be victims of manipulation by something beyond their understanding. But it was an alliance nonetheless. Over the following weeks, the investigation uncovered more disturbing evidence. Subtle energy fluctuations in Earth's electromagnetic field that had begun appearing 3 months before the Imperial arrival. Anomalous readings in the space between galaxies suggesting dimensional boundaries had been deliberately thinned. And most troubling, reports from across both Earth and the Imperial fleet of strange dreams, visions of geometric shapes and impossible colors that multiple unconnected individuals had experienced. Lieutenant Vex compiled the findings into a comprehensive report that Thrask presented to the Joint Command Council, now overseeing Earth-Imperial relations. Someone has been preparing Earth for first contact, Thrask explained, displaying the energy fluctuation data. These readings suggest reality manipulation on a scale we can't replicate with any known technology, Imperial or otherwise. And the psychological reports indicate some form of subliminal conditioning. People were being primed to accept the impossible before it happened. To what end? General Webb demanded. What does this entity gain from forcing our civilizations together? Perhaps they're simply observing, Dr. Kim suggested. Sociological study on a massive scale. Or perhaps they're preparing us for something else, another test, another contact. Something that requires Earth and the Empire to already have an established relationship. Commander Srell pulled up additional star charts, these showing unexplored space beyond both Earth's local stellar neighborhood and the Empire's known territory. There's a third possibility. Whatever entity did this might be evaluating whether our combined civilizations are suitable for recruitment, alliance, integration into something larger. The room fell silent as that implication sank in. Humanity had just barely adapted to the existence of the Galactic Empire. The thought that there might be even more powerful civilizations out there, capable of manipulating both Earth and the Empire like pieces on a game board, was almost too much to process. President Morrison stood, her expression hardening with determination. Then we need to become strong enough that we're not pieces. We're players. This joint investigation continues at maximum priority. We pool our resources, our knowledge, our capabilities. And we prepare for the possibility that whoever's watching us might eventually make direct contact. Agreed, Srell said. I'm authorizing expanded technology transfer to Earth. Hyperspace theory, basic deflector shield technology, improved power generation. If we're going to face unknown threats, we need Earth's industrial capacity and human ingenuity integrated with Imperial technology and tactical doctrine. It was a radical departure from standard Imperial occupation policy. But then, nothing about Earth's integration into the Empire had followed standard protocols. The Concordat had been negotiated rather than imposed. The occupation had been collaborative rather than oppressive. And now, faced with evidence of manipulation by unknown powers, both civilizations were choosing partnership over hierarchy. Thrask watched the Council agree to accelerated integration protocols and felt something unexpected. Hope. Not the desperate hope of resistance, but genuine hope that two civilizations forced together by circumstance might actually become something stronger than either had been separately. There's one more thing, he said as the Council began to adjourn. If someone deliberately brought the Empire to Earth, they had to know what would happen. They had to know we'd fight, that people would die, that it would be traumatic for both sides. Which means either they're completely amoral observers who don't care about casualties, or the trauma was part of the test, Morrison finished. They wanted to see how we'd handle conflict, how we'd negotiate peace, how we'd move past violence toward cooperation. Which means we might have passed their test, Srel observed. Or we might have failed it spectacularly. Either way, we'll likely find out eventually. The meeting concluded with more questions than answers, but with a commitment from both Earth and Imperial leadership to face those questions together. It wasn't the future anyone had envisioned 6 months ago, but it was a future with possibility rather than just survival. As Thrask left the conference room, Lieutenant Vex fell into step beside him. "Sir, do you really think we were set up? That all of this was some kind of cosmic experiment?" "I think the universe is stranger than we imagined, Lieutenant. Both Earth's universe and the Empire's galaxy. And I think we've only just begun to understand how strange it might get." "Are you afraid?" Thrask considered the question honestly. "Yes, but I'm also curious. For the first time since I deserted, I feel like I'm part of something that matters. Not just following orders, but actually trying to understand something fundamental about reality. That's worth being afraid for." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Vex spoke again. "The crew from the Inexorable, the ones who survived, they've been asking about you. Most of them have accepted the Concordat. Some are even working with Earth's military as training advisors. They don't hate you for what you did, sir. They understand why. That doesn't make the casualties any less real. No, but it makes them mean something. You killed people you served with to prevent genocide. That's not murder, sir. That's sacrifice. Theirs and yours." Thrask nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He'd carry the weight of that shuttle attack for the rest of his life. But perhaps Vex was right. Perhaps those deaths had purchased something more valuable than military victory. They'd purchased the possibility of a future where humanity and the Empire learned to coexist. And if there were unknown entities out there watching, testing, manipulating, well, they'd see that both civilizations could adapt, could grow, could become something neither had been alone. It was enough. For now, it was enough. 1 year after first contact, Earth looked both familiar and transformed. The skylines of major cities now featured Imperial architecture integrated with human designs. Durasteel towers rising beside glass skyscrapers, creating a hybrid aesthetic that symbolized the uneasy partnership between civilizations. Imperial shuttles shared airspace with conventional aircraft. Stormtrooper patrols had become commonplace enough that children no longer stared when they passed. But the real changes ran deeper than architecture or military presence. In orbit, the joint Earth-Imperial defense platform hung like a promise and a warning. Built with human industrial capacity and Imperial engineering, it represented both civilizations' commitment to mutual defense against whatever unknown threats might emerge. The station bristled with weapons, turbo laser batteries provided by the Empire, railgun systems designed by humanity, and experimental hybrid systems that neither civilization could have developed alone. Captain Dax Thrask stood on the station's command deck, watching Earth rotate beneath him. It had taken a year, but he'd stopped thinking of the planet as a conquered world and started seeing it as his new home. The crew around him reflected that transformation. Humans and Imperials working side by side. Their initial suspicion gradually giving way to professional respect and occasionally genuine friendship. "Sir, incoming transmission from the surface." Lieutenant Vex reported from his sensor station. "It's President Morrison. Priority channel." Morrison's face appeared on the main display. And Thrask immediately noticed her expression, excited rather than worried. That was new. Captain, we've had a breakthrough. Dr. Kim's team just successfully tested the first human-designed hyperspace engine, but it worked. We can actually navigate between star systems now. Thrask felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. How far did you test it? Only to Mars and back, but the principles are sound. With Imperial hyperspace theory and human manufacturing techniques, we've created something that's actually more efficient than standard Imperial drives. Smaller, faster spin-up time, and it runs on fusion power instead of requiring hypermatter. Granted, it's limited range compared to your ships, but for local stellar exploration, it's perfect. That's remarkable. Congratulations, Madam President. Thank you. But Dax, she'd started using his first name months ago, after the investigation into the unknown regions had forged genuine respect between them. This means humanity isn't trapped in our solar system anymore. We can explore. We can establish colonies on other worlds. We can become a true spacefaring civilization. With Imperial oversight, Commander Srel interjected, his image appearing beside Morrison's. He'd been promoted to Admiral after successfully integrating Earth into Imperial administration without further bloodshed. The Concordat specifies that Earth's expansion must be coordinated with Imperial strategic interests, which we're fully prepared to do, Morrison replied smoothly. But Srel, humanity having independent spaceflight capability fundamentally changes our relationship. We're not just a protectorate anymore. We're a civilization with agency, with the ability to contribute meaningfully to Imperial defense and exploration. Srel's expression was unreadable. Chiss rarely showed emotion, but Thrask knew him well enough by now to recognize calculation behind those red eyes. You're requesting renegotiation of the Concordat's terms. I'm suggesting that the terms were written for a pre-spaceflight civilization under occupation. That's not what we are anymore. We've integrated Imperial technology, contributed to joint defense, and now we've demonstrated innovation that benefits both our civilizations. It's time for a partnership agreement, not a protectorate arrangement. It was a bold move, and Thrask understood immediately why Morrison had called him first. She wanted his assessment of how Srel would react, and possibly his support if this turned into a political confrontation. The Empire doesn't typically renegotiate surrender terms, Srel said carefully. It sets a precedent that could complicate governance across other protectorates. Then don't call it renegotiation. Call it evolutionary adaptation to changing circumstances. The unknown region's investigation proved we're stronger together than separately. This hyperspace breakthrough proves humanity can innovate beyond our current technological base. And the defense platform shows we can integrate our capabilities into something neither civilization could build alone. Those are facts, Srel. The question is whether the Empire is flexible enough to recognize when its standard models don't fit. Thrask decided it was time to weigh in. Admiral Srel, if I may, President Morrison is correct. Earth's strategic value has increased exponentially, not just as a resource base, but as a source of innovation and industrial capacity. The Empire has always been pragmatic about power. If Earth can contribute more as a partner than as a protectorate, doesn't that serve Imperial interests better? Srel was silent for a long moment, his tactical mind clearly running through scenarios and implications. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'll forward your request to Imperial Command. But Captain Thrask, President Morrison, understand that this could take months. The Empire moves slowly on matters of governance structure. We've waited a year, Morrison said. We can wait longer, as long as we're moving in the right direction." After the transmission ended, Thrask remained on the command deck, thinking about how far both civilizations had come. A year ago, they'd been enemies, engaged in a war for survival. Now they were negotiating the terms of partnership, debating governance structures, and collectively wondering what mysteries the unknown regions might hold. The investigation into the entity that had engineered their first contact had yielded frustratingly little concrete evidence. The energy signatures had faded. The strange dreams had stopped. Whatever or whoever had manipulated events had apparently completed their observation and withdrawn. But the knowledge that someone was out there, capable of such power, had fundamentally changed how both Earth and the Empire viewed their place in the cosmos. They weren't alone. Not just Earth and the Empire, but something beyond both of them. Something that made Imperial Star Destroyers look as primitive as Earth's nuclear weapons had seemed to the Empire. That knowledge had driven the rapid technological cooperation between civilizations. If there were powers out there capable of manipulating reality itself, humanity and the Empire needed to become stronger, smarter, more capable. Separately, they were targets. Together, they might be equals. "Sir, incoming vessels," Vex announced, pulling Thrask from his thoughts. Multiple hyperspace signatures emerging at the edge of the system, not Imperial configuration, not human either. Something else. Alarms immediately sounded across the station. Thrask moved to the tactical display, his pulse quickening. How many? 3 ships, large, capital ship class by mass. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. "Sir, they're trying to communicate." "Put it through." The transmission that came through was unlike anything Thrask had heard in 23 years of Imperial service. The voice was synthetic, clearly artificial intelligence rather than organic, speaking perfect English with an accent that suggested it had learned from multiple human languages simultaneously. "Greetings to the civilizations of Earth and the Galactic Empire. We are representatives of the Assembly, a collective of civilizations that monitors and guides emerging spacefaring species. Your integration over the past year has been observed with interest. We wish to establish formal diplomatic relations. On Earth, every military installation went to maximum alert simultaneously. President Morrison was in contact with Admiral Shrell within seconds, both of them patching through to Thrask's station. "Captain, what are we dealing with?" Morrison demanded. Thrask studied the sensor readings, his mind racing. The ships were larger than Star Destroyers, their power signatures off the scale. But they weren't adopting aggressive formations. If anything, they seemed deliberately non-threatening. Unknown configuration, unknown technology. But they're not behaving like hostiles. They're maintaining distance and broadcasting continuously. They want to talk, not fight. "The Assembly," Shrell said, pulling up Imperial intelligence databases. "There are legends in the unknown regions. Stories of a multi-species organization that appears at critical junctures in civilization's development. The Chiss Ascendancy has records of contact centuries ago. They were observers, evaluators. You think they're the ones who brought us together?" Morrison asked. "It would make sense. They engineered first contact to see how we'd handle it. Now they're revealing themselves because we passed whatever test they set." The artificial voice continued. "We understand you may have questions about recent events. The hyperspace anomaly that brought Imperial forces to Earth was indeed our creation. We apologize for any distress this caused, but it was necessary to evaluate how both your civilizations would respond to unexpected first contact under challenging circumstances. Thrask felt vindication mixed with anger. They'd been right. It had been engineered. But that didn't make the casualties any less real, the trauma any less painful. "You killed millions to run your experiment," he transmitted back. "Jakarta, the nuclear exchange, the battle that crippled the inexorable. Those deaths are on your hands." "We understand your anger, Captain Thrask. Yes, we knew casualties were likely. That was part of the evaluation, how both civilizations would handle loss, negotiate peace, and build cooperation from conflict. We regret the deaths, but we do not apologize for the methodology. The universe contains threats far greater than anything you've yet encountered. We needed to know if your species, both of them, possessed the resilience and adaptability to survive what's coming." "What's coming?" Morrison's voice was tight. "What are you talking about?" The three ships moved closer, still maintaining non-threatening distance, but now visible in the tactical displays as elegant, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them. "The galaxy is entering a period of great upheaval," the assembly representative explained. "Powers from beyond known space are beginning to probe civilized regions. The Galactic Empire, despite its size and strength, is not prepared for what approaches. Neither is Earth. But together, with proper guidance and technological support, you might be." "So you're recruiters," Srel said flatly. "You engineered our conflict to see if we were worth investing in. We are facilitators. The Assembly exists to help emerging civilizations survive the transition to true spacefaring status. Most fail. They destroy themselves through war, environmental collapse, or technological mismanagement. Some succeed but remain isolated and vulnerable. A few, a very few, demonstrate the qualities we look for: resilience, innovation, the ability to cooperate across differences, and the wisdom to choose survival over pride." "And you think Earth and the Empire have these qualities?" Morrison asked. "You're here, aren't you? You survived first contact. You negotiated peace. You're building joint infrastructure and sharing technology. You're investigating mysteries together rather than fighting over territory. Those are not common outcomes, President Morrison. Most civilizations in your position would still be engaged in total warfare, or one would have completely subjugated the other. You chose a third path." Thrask felt the pieces clicking into place. This was always your goal. Not just observation, cultivation. You wanted to create an alliance between a young, innovative civilization and an established empire. You wanted Earth and the Empire to need each other. "Correct, Captain. Earth provides innovation, industrial capacity, and a fresh perspective unconstrained by imperial orthodoxy. The Empire provides technology, military doctrine, and galactic-scale infrastructure. Together, you represent a strategic asset far more valuable than either civilization separately." "And what do you get from this?" Srel demanded. "Allies. When the threats from beyond begin their incursions, the Assembly will need every capable civilization ready to respond. We offer technology transfer far beyond what the Empire currently possesses, strategic intelligence about threats you don't yet know exist, and diplomatic integration with dozens of other civilizations who faced similar challenges. In exchange, we ask that you contribute to collective defense when the time comes." It was too much information, too fast. Earth and the Empire were still adjusting to each other's existence, and now they were being told there was an entire network of civilizations out there, coordinating against threats neither had encountered yet. President Morrison spoke carefully. "We're interested in dialogue, but we're not making commitments until we understand exactly what you're proposing. And we're certainly not grateful that you engineered a war that killed millions of our people to test us. Understood. We will establish a diplomatic mission on your orbital platform. Our representatives will answer your questions and provide evidence of the threats we speak of. You will make your own decisions about whether to accept our offer of alliance. But I will say this. You have perhaps 5 years before the first major incursion reaches this region of space. What you do with that time will determine whether your civilizations survive the next century. The transmission ended, leaving behind 3 ships holding position at the system's edge, waiting for permission to approach, demonstrating respect for Earth's sovereignty, even as they revealed they'd manipulated events leading to humanity's current situation. Thrask, Morrison, and Srel remained on their respective channels, processing what they'd just learned. 5 years, Morrison finally said. They're saying we have 5 years to prepare for something that required them to force the Empire and Earth together as an emergency measure. Which means whatever's coming is worse than anything we can currently imagine, Srel added. The Empire has faced rebels, criminal syndicates, even force wielders. But if this assembly engineered our alliance specifically to prepare us for an external threat, then we accept their offer, Thrask said decisively. Not because we trust them, we don't. Not because we forgive what they did, we don't. But because we're not fools. If there's a threat big enough to require this level of preparation, we need every advantage they can give us. Morrison nodded slowly. Agreed. But we negotiate from a position of partnership, not desperation. Earth and the Empire together, equals with the Assembly, not subordinates. We've earned that much. I'll forward the proposal to Imperial Command, Srel said. But Captain Thrask, President Morrison, I believe we've just entered a much larger game than any of us anticipated. The question is whether we're players or pieces. We're players, Morrison said with steel in her voice. We proved that when we fought each other to a standstill and chose cooperation over annihilation. Whatever's coming, we'll face it the same way. Together, on our terms, with our eyes open. The 3 assembly ships received permission to approach. Within hours, their representatives would board the orbital platform and begin the complex negotiations that would define Earth and the Empire's place in a galactic community neither had known existed. But as Thrask stood on the command deck watching those crystalline vessels draw closer, he felt something he hadn't experienced since before he'd become captain of the inexorable. Purpose beyond duty. The Empire had given him structure and order. Earth had given him a chance at redemption. Now the Assembly was offering both civilizations a role in something larger than either had imagined. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. And it was exactly what they needed. Because humanity and the Empire had learned a crucial lesson over the past year. They were stronger together than apart. And if the universe was truly as dangerous as the Assembly suggested, that strength would be tested in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. But they'd face it. Together. And that made all the difference. 2 years after first contact, Captain Dax Thrask stood in the observation lounge of the newly christened Unity Station, the joint Earth Imperial Assembly facility that orbited between Earth and Mars. Through the viewport, he could see vessels from 3 different civilizations working in coordinated formation. Imperial Star Destroyers retrofitted with human-designed hyperspace engines. Earth's first generation of purpose-built warships, incorporating technology from all 3 partners, and the elegant crystalline vessels of the Assembly's diplomatic corps. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable during those terrifying first days of invasion, when nuclear weapons had failed and cities had burned. Yet here they were. not just coexisting, but thriving through collaboration that had transformed both civilizations in ways neither could have achieved alone. The past year of cooperation with the Assembly had accelerated Earth's technological development by centuries. Humanity now possessed not just hyperspace capability, but deflector shield technology, advanced material science, and most importantly, understanding of the threats lurking in the darkness between galaxies. The Assembly's warnings had proven accurate. Preliminary long-range scans had detected anomalous energy signatures approaching from beyond known space, moving with purpose and intelligence that suggested organized invasion rather than random phenomena. The threats were still years away, but preparation was already underway. Earth's industrial capacity, once turned toward manufacturing consumer goods and weapons for terrestrial conflicts, now produced starship components at a scale that impressed even the Empire's veteran shipwrights. Imperial tactical doctrine, refined through millennia of warfare, was being enhanced by human innovation and Assembly strategic intelligence. Together, the three civilizations were building a defensive network that might actually stand a chance against whatever was coming. President Morrison had successfully renegotiated the Concordat 6 months ago. Earth was no longer an Imperial protectorate, but a full partner in what had been renamed the Terran-Imperial Alliance. Humans served on Imperial vessels, Imperial officers trained at Earth's military academies. The cultural exchange was transforming both societies in profound ways. The Empire learning that order didn't require tyranny, humanity discovering that structure could coexist with freedom. But the scars remained. Jakarta was still rebuilding. The families who'd lost loved ones in the nuclear exchange and the orbital bombardments still mourned. The 4 million dead in Jakarta's crater, the hundreds of thousands more killed in military installations worldwide, the Imperial crew members who died aboard the Inexorable. Their ghosts haunted every diplomatic success and technological breakthrough. Thrask carried his own ghosts. He'd been pardoned officially, celebrated even, for his role in preventing greater massacres and facilitating the eventual peace. But absolution from governments didn't erase the memory of ordering that kinetic strike, knowing it would kill people he'd served alongside. Redemption, he'd learned, wasn't a destination, but a journey, one he'd be walking for the rest of his life. Lieutenant Vex joined him at the viewport, now promoted to commander and serving as Thrask's second-in-command on Unity Station. "Sir, the Assembly ambassadors are asking to speak with you. Something about the deep space probes we deployed last month." Thrask nodded, tearing his gaze away from the ships outside. "What did they find?" "They wouldn't say over comms. They want to brief the Joint Command in person. But sir, they looked worried. I've never seen the Assembly representatives show that much emotion." Whatever was coming, it was apparently worse than even the Assembly had anticipated. That should have terrified Thrask. Instead, he felt a strange calm. Earth and the Empire had survived their first contact through resilience, sacrifice, and the willingness to choose cooperation over pride. They'd faced the impossible and found a way forward. Whatever the universe threw at them next, they'd face it the same way. Together. "Assemble the command staff," Thrask ordered. "Human, Imperial, and Assembly representatives. If the threats are accelerating, we need to know now." As Vex moved to comply, Thrask took one last look at the fleet outside. Symbols of 3 civilizations learning to work as one. The Galactic Empire had come to Earth expecting easy conquest and found unexpected resistance. Humanity had faced invasion, expecting annihilation, and discovered the possibility of partnership. The Assembly had engineered their meeting, expecting to cultivate useful allies, and found two species with the potential to become true equals. It had cost millions of lives. It had required compromises and sacrifices that still generated controversy on both sides. The path forward remained uncertain, fraught with dangers both known and unknown. But it was a path they'd walked together, and that made even the darkest prospects bearable. The war for Earth's survival had ended with negotiated peace rather than total victory or crushing defeat. Perhaps that was the real lesson, that survival sometimes required accepting imperfect outcomes and building something better from the ruins of conflict. The Empire had learned that conquest without consent bred endless resistance. Humanity had learned that pride without power was just martyrdom. Together, they'd learned that cooperation, however reluctant initially, created strength neither could achieve alone. As Thrask headed toward the briefing room to learn what new crisis awaited them, he allowed himself a small smile. They'd survived first contact with an empire from beyond the stars. They'd uncovered manipulation by powers even greater than that empire. They'd built alliances across civilizations and prepared for threats they barely understood. Whatever came next, Earth and the Empire would face it not as conquerors and conquered, but as partners united by shared purpose and hard-won respect. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, full of mysteries and threats beyond imagination. But it was also full of possibilities, for cooperation, for growth, for civilizations learning that their differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses. The invasion that had begun with Star Destroyers emerging from hyperspace above an unsuspecting Earth had evolved into something no one could have predicted. A genuine alliance built not on shared culture or easy compatibility, but on mutual recognition that survival required setting aside old assumptions and embracing new possibilities. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected when those triangular ships first appeared in orbit. But it was an ending that offered hope. And hope, as humanity and the Empire had both learned, was the most powerful force in the universe.